I have a sweet at the end of the world. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 826 Weapons and Alliances. Time soon arrived in mid-July. Although it is summer all year round, Koro Island is located south of the equator after all, so it is still a little hotter at this time of year in previous years. Since Natasha revealed to Jiang Chen that the Freemasons would send gatekeepers to Asia, Jiang Chen has reduced unnecessary travel. Although he was not worried that someone could pose a threat to him on this island, he still took this matter to heart at Asia's strong request. At the same time, the ghost agent also launched an investigation into the so-called gatekeeper. Unfortunately, not all things can be solved simply and crudely by relying on technology. So far, the ghost agent has not been able to lock the identity of the gatekeeper. The Future Group has withdrawn its industries in Europe. The EU economy has been overshadowed by local protectionism. The space activities of starring trade are still frequent. The civil war in Turkey is still going on, and the situation in Mindanao has begun to gradually deteriorate. The atmosphere between the Philippine and Moro armies confronting each other on Mindanao has become tense and ready to explode. It is no exaggeration to say that a war may break out in the next second, and the reason may be that a sentry forgot to turn off the safety of his rifle. In terms of public opinion, both sides did not hesitate to engage in verbal battles. Aquino IV accused Santos of serious corruption, unfair treatment of Filipinos living on Mindanao, and his delay in lifting the wartime regulations, which was a contempt for human rights. Santos, in turn, accused Aquino IV of deploying tens of thousands of troops on the border and not giving him the opportunity to lift the wartime regulations. The people of Mindanao must take up arms to fight against the possible invasion. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that this is the Philippines building momentum for war. In Davao Port in northern Mindanao, Jiang Chen walked off the Gulfstream private jet accompanied by more than a dozen bodyguards wearing mechanical exoskeletons. Standing next to him, in addition to a group of bodyguards, there was also Asia, who was dressed in a suit and leather shoes. Her eyes behind the electronic sunglasses kept scanning the edge of the airport evenly. Jiang Chen certainly did not come to Mindanao for tourism under the current situation, but to make a deal with Russia. The motorcade sent by Santos received him at the Ambassador Hotel, where he was staying. At 3 p.m., Jiang Chen and others also went to a warehouse belonging to Starring Trade in the south of Mindanao and met with Russian officer Shatov. This burly Russian man, both in his face and in his manners, was very tense. After seeing Jiang Chen, he stretched out his right hand neatly. "Nice to meet you. Let me introduce myself. My name is very long. According to the Chinese language habits, you can call me Mr. Shatov or Lieutenant Colonel Shatov." To Jiang Chen's surprise, the Russian spoke very good Chinese, even with a bit of a northeastern accent. After shaking hands with him, Jiang Chen also made a simple self-introduction. "Jiang Chen, chairman of Starring Trade." Shatov nodded and said straight to the point. "I heard that you are planning to make a deal with us, and the Kremlin attaches great importance to this. So, may I ask, what is your proposal? Send 2 more divisions to the Crimean Peninsula. I hope you can put pressure on the EU on the Ukrainian issue," Jiang Chen said. Shatov was stunned. He obviously did not expect to make such an abrupt request. Ukraine is NATO's bottom line on the issue of Eastern Europe. If Russia continues to move forward, it is very likely to ignite the powder keg of the entire Eastern Europe. A head-on collision with Russia is not in the interests of NATO and other Western countries, but at the same time, Russia will not want to fight with its enemy now. After all, no matter from which angle you look at it, if a war really breaks out, the Russian army's chances of winning are not great. Comrade Brzezinski once said that Russia will not be able to become a great power without Ukraine. I don't believe you will be willing to give up this once-in-a-century opportunity, and now this opportunity is in front of you. Jiang Chen looked into Shatov's eyes and suddenly smiled. "Let's not talk about this first. Let's talk about the reward." "Excuse me, your proposal is probably not going to work," Shatov replied helplessly. "That's not necessarily true," Jiang Chen said. snapping his fingers at the bodyguard next to him. The soldier who understood the bodyguard meeting walked towards the soldier guarding the warehouse. After a brief explanation, the two soldiers on guard turned around and quickly opened the door of the warehouse. A dry breath came to his face. Looking at the dark warehouse, Shatov frowned slightly. "Follow me." Jiang Chen smiled slightly and walked towards the warehouse first. Shatov hesitated for a moment and followed him forward. From the outside, the warehouse looked inconspicuous, but when he walked into the warehouse, he unexpectedly found that the warehouse was surprisingly large. Soon the soldier turned on the light, and the incandescent lamp on the top illuminated the space inside. Shatov squinted his eyes and saw the thing lying alone in the middle of the warehouse. "What is this?" Shatov walked forward and reached out to knock on the round tube-shaped thing. "Remember the Madagascar incident last month?" Jiang Chen smiled. Shatov's pupils shrank slightly, and he withdrew his hand. "Is this a nuclear weapon?" "No, it's a conventional weapon," Jiang Chen said with a smile, while walking to the side of the cylindrical device. "But it's just that its power is more amazing than nuclear weapons, especially for modern society." When Jiang Chen said this, Shatov didn't react for a while. But after he chewed it over and over again, his expression suddenly became quite exciting, and his fingers trembled. Could it be that this is an electromagnetic pulse weapon? Yes, we call it EMP, and it is a strategic level EMP, slightly larger than the one used on Mayat Island. Jiang Chen smiled and nodded, tapping the cylindrical device with his finger. The combat components of the Swordbreaker 1 can be installed on intercontinental missiles. Just one shot can indiscriminately destroy unprotected electronic equipment within 100,000 square kilometers, and it will not leave any pollution. Having said this, Jiang Chen stopped talking, looked at Shatov who was frozen there, and smiled. "Now, do you still think my proposal will not work? Are you willing to sell us the technology of this weapon? We never sell technology, but we are happy to sell products. The combat parts of 10 Swordbreaker 1s should be enough for you," Jiang Chen said. EMP weapons are weapons in laboratories in any country, but apart from high-altitude nuclear explosions, no one has yet developed an environmentally friendly electromagnetic pulse excitation method. If this Swordbreaker 1 is as powerful as Jiang Chen said, its existence will completely reverse the situation of the Russian army's lack of confidence when facing NATO. "I can't give you a clear answer, but I will ask the Kremlin for instructions," Shatov answered cautiously. "No problem. I look forward to getting good news when I meet you next time," Jiang Chen said with a smile. Chapter 827 The Beginning of the War. That afternoon, Shatov returned to Russia on a Russian military plane. When he left, Jiang Chen gave him the Swordbreaker 1 in the warehouse, asking him to take it back as a sample for the Kremlin to see. As for whether the Russians would restore the technology of the Swordbreaker 1 through reverse engineering, Jiang Chen was not worried about this issue. The technological gap was there. Even if the Russians were given 10 years to study the Swordbreaker 1, they might not be able to imitate their own EMP weapons with just a dozen limited samples. What's more, the coverage of the Swordbreaker 1 was only 100,000 square kilometers of EMP, which was only equivalent to a quarter of California. As far as strategic weapons were concerned, it was not a top-notch thing in Jiang Chen's hands, and could only be regarded as the first generation of strategic EMP weapons. At least those Dolphin 10 intercontinental missiles deployed on the seabed were equipped with EMP combat components at the level of 1 million square kilometers. That was the real killer, and it was not an exaggeration to call it the killer of modern civilization. The Kremlin did not let Jiang Chen wait for long. On the third day after the meeting in Mindanao, the Russian side took the initiative to contact Jiang Chen. At Natasha's invitation, Jiang Chen went to the Russian embassy. What surprised Jiang Chen was that the person who contacted him was actually the Russian president, Putin. There was no extra nonsense. After the call was connected, Putin went straight to the point and put forward his own requirements. 20 combat parts of the Swordbreaker 1. If you are unwilling to sell the relevant technology, I hope you can at least open the military sales window. No problem. If you use up these 20 Swordbreaker 1s, I can sell you another 20 EMP combat parts at a lower price. But I have a request, that is, to send our specialists to you. we must at least confirm that the gift we give you is used on the battlefield or in exercises, rather than being reimbursed in the laboratory," Jiang Chen said. "What is the lower price?" Putin asked. 340 million rubles. Hearing Jiang Chen's offer, Putin's expression was a little surprised. It's not because of the price. 340 million rubles is equivalent to $5 million US. Compared with the killing effect it caused, this price is fair. What really surprised Putin was that Jiang Chen proposed to settle the bill in rubles. If he remembered correctly, the several military sales contracts he had negotiated with Singapore were all in US dollars. Not in US dollars? Putin asked bluntly. My intuition tells me that the ruble will be very valuable soon. Jiang Chen smiled. It may fall in the short term, but in the long run, it will at least be more valuable than it is now. However, the reason why Jiang Chen did this was not entirely because the ruble was expected to appreciate. There was another more important reason. On the other end of the phone, Putin laughed twice. Haha, to use a Chinese saying, borrow your good words. It seems that our cooperation has been reached. Jiang Chen couldn't help but smile. Although he failed to pull the WASP consortium on the other side of the ocean onto the chariot, he successfully won over the old Russians. Freemasonry, which is based in Europe, can no longer put pressure on the new country by staying out of the matter. The threat from the east will directly approach their hinterland. I wish us a happy cooperation. Putin smiled. Happy cooperation. As the situation in Mindanao continued to heat up, the Ukrainian crisis once again entered the eyes of people around the world. With Russia's high-profile increase of 100,000 ground troops and deployment in the Crimean Peninsula and the Russian-Ukrainian border, Europe, which has been in a state of turmoil, has once again stood on the precarious wave. This time, the Russians not only showed their muscles toughly, but also showed their determination to win. When facing reporters, Putin reiterated Russia's position of supporting the right of Russians to choose their own destiny, and for the first time recognized the legitimacy of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. Such a move undoubtedly greatly encouraged the civilian armed forces still fighting in Donetsk and other regions. Since the implementation of the ceasefire agreement, they have never achieved a real ceasefire with the Ukrainian government forces. The Western world was in an uproar. No one expected that Russia would suddenly do such irrational things. The European Commission held an emergency meeting on this matter. At the same time, on the next day, 11 countries including France, Germany, and Poland successively issued statements that, if the Russian army dared to cross the Russian-Ukrainian border, it would be regarded as a provocation to the UN Charter. The strongest reaction came from the United States across the Pacific. The White House spokesman claimed that, if Russia crossed the Russian-Ukrainian border, NATO would also set a precedent of sending troops to non-member friendly countries. At the same time, President Hillary also revealed new sanctions against Russia in an interview with the media. However, some analysts commented that, whether the sanctions this time would work, and whether NATO would break this precedent, whether these checks would be cashed or not, remains to be discussed. Due to the outbreak of the civil war in Turkey, the anti-government forces controlled a large area of territory in eastern Turkey, resulting in the severance of the southern corridor from Europe to Azerbaijan. It must be said that in the Freemasons' hasty plan to secularize Turkey, due to Russia's sudden attack on the Ukrainian issue, this civil war has become a major failure. As the southern corridor was cut off due to the war, Europe's natural gas supply pressure has increased dramatically. In contrast, Europe's demand for natural gas imported from Russia has risen sharply. If the EU joins the new sanctions against Russia, advocated by the United States, the EU, which is anemic in natural gas, will become the biggest loser. Even if the Freemasons intend to push the EU to confront Russia over Ukraine, in reality, their industries in Europe also rely on natural gas imported from Russia. Russia's sudden attack undoubtedly disrupted their strategic layout. At this moment, in the presidential palace of the new country, Jiang Chen was discussing the issue in Madagascar with Zhang Yaping. Just yesterday, Zhang Yaping had just ended his diplomatic visit to Madagascar and achieved good results. Madagascar has agreed to carry out deeper cooperation with us in the economic and trade fields. If we are willing to help them rebuild the Mayad power grid and provide a $1 billion aid loan, they will agree to contract the mining area in northern Madagascar to us. It was originally an asset of Arrowhead Company, but it was confiscated as a state asset after the nuclear crisis. No problem, agree to his terms, Jiang Chen said. At this moment, a call suddenly came in. Jiang Chen clicked on the holographic screen and looked at the caller. It was Ivan. Out of courtesy, he then looked at President Zhang. Mind if I answer the phone? No problem. Zhang Yaping waved his hand. Jiang Chen took the phone, walked to the window of the president's office, and answered the call. Hello. It's the Filipinos. They've taken action. Although he had expected this, when this moment really came, Jiang Chen's heart still twitched twice. The war finally broke out. Chapter 828, Circuitous Strategy. The Philippines tore up the armistice agreement, which was expected by everyone. However, one thing was beyond the expectations of starring trade and the Moro military. Instead of landing from the Surigao Strait in the north of Mindanao Island, the Philippines chose to cross the Bohol Sea and directly landed on the weakly defended Cagayan City. At the same time, risking the destruction of aircraft and casualties, it airdropped an entire mountain brigade to Mount Mangabang to attack the port of Cagayan City from the east and north. This is the Cagayan City military base. We are under Philippine artillery fire. The command center has received it. The Aurora 20 has taken off and is heading to the target's airspace. The shells were thrown from the other side of the sea, and the Philippines deployed artillery positions on Bohol Island. Judging from the intensity of the opponent's firepower, the Freemasons obviously spent a lot of money on the Philippines, and howitzer shells were thrown like popcorn, as if they were free. Carrying American weapons, the Philippine Army, under the cover of civilian transport ships, broke through the defense zone of the 13th Brigade of the Moro Kingdom from the port of Cagayan City, forcing it to retreat. Although starring trade has a certain number of garrisons in Cagayan City, the number is still too small. Since the end of the biochemical crisis, the Marines stationed here have retreated back to their country, or transferred to the Surigao region. The combat unit in Cagayan City has only 100 people, which is equivalent to the strength of a platoon. Although the battlefield commander responded at the first time, the width of the front line is too large to be filled by 100 people. The 102nd Platoon stationed there immediately divided into 9 teams and engaged in a firefight with the 21st Infantry Brigade of the Philippines that broke through the friendly defense line in the western urban area of Cagayan City. With the cooperation of individual drones and the Aurora 20 that rushed to support, the 102nd Platoon made the Philippine Army pay a heavy price, but unfortunately, Cagayan City was still lost. After receiving Ivan's call, Jiang Chen immediately left the presidential palace, drove to the pier, and took a speedboat to Crescent Island. After arriving on the island, Jiang Chen went to the headquarters without stopping. When he arrived, the headquarters was already busy. Staff members shuttled in front of rows of computers, and the liaison officers wore headphones and repeated the combat orders issued by their superiors at a fast speed, and connected the frontline soldiers with their strikes and intelligence resources. After passing a row of computers, Jiang Chen walked straight to Ivan, who was standing at the command table in front, and exchanging opinions with the officers and staff. When they saw Jiang Chen, they immediately stopped what they were doing, stood at attention and saluted him. Jiang Chen simply returned the salute and immediately got straight to the point. No need to be polite. What is the situation on the front line? Ivan pointed the laser pen at the holographic screen on the command table, on which the Air Force scanned the location information of the Philippine Army. Judging from the arc-shaped attack line, the situation of the 13th Brigade of the Moro Kingdom, which was caught in it, was very bad, even to the point of being in danger. The Philippine Army deployed artillery positions based on roadbed fortifications in the north of Bohol Island and bombarded our base in Cagayan City. Cagayan City is the weak point of the Moro Army's air defense force. They directly gave up gaining air superiority and forced transport planes to airdrop a mountain brigade on Mount Mangabang. Although it was risky, it must be said that they succeeded, giving up the reserve of modern warfare and putting themselves in the position of the asymmetric party from the beginning. The Philippines is much smarter this time than last time. If they follow the Army's combat style again and put all their muscles on the negotiating table, I'm afraid they will be annihilated by the entire division again. At this time, the Philippine Army on the holographic map made new moves. The forces of two brigades set out from the Sulu Sea and landed on the Moro mainland in Zamboanga City. At this moment, the two frigates of starring trade were located in the waters east of Luzon Island and Samar Island respectively, guarding against the Philippine army crossing the Surigao Strait. Even though they had lost control of the sea and air, the Philippine army seemed to have calculated the shortage of the starring trade air force and navy. Even with strong firepower, they still could not protect both directions of Mindanao Island at the same time. Such tactics were quite risky. Without control of the sea and air, it meant that the army deep into the heart of Moro could not obtain effective supplies. However, the Philippines had calculated the weakness of the number of Moro and starring trade, and was ready to use the method of continuously deploying troops to launch a war of attrition similar to guerrilla warfare with Moro. It was very risky, but it could make up for the disadvantage in equipment. Shit, I don't understand why they bought so many tanks as decorations. The commander of the Philippine army is definitely not Marshal Stark. If he can issue such a combat order, he must be a madman or a gambler. An officer couldn't help but curse. Our opponent is likely to be Moritz, a military advisor from Germany. The director of the military intelligence department replied, "No matter who our opponent is, we will beat them badly." Jiang Chen pointed to two locations on the holographic map and then fiercely drew two dividing lines. "We have both air supremacy and sea supremacy. Now the Americans are still watching, and we must end this war before they decide to keep peace. Since the Philippines intends to fight a war of attrition with me, then we will go directly to Manila to catch war criminals. This war cannot be dragged on. If the Philippine Mountain Division is allowed to fight guerrilla warfare in Mindanao and Moro, the production of the future man mining area will undoubtedly be interrupted by guerrilla activities. The world ore market is monopolized by the Jews. The factories of the future man group all rely on the ore transportation from Mindanao. If the raw materials are not supplied, the industrial capacity of Angar Island and the new Malaysia Special Zone will be seriously affected." Looking at the location marked by Jiang Chen on the holographic map, Ivan touched the stubble on his chin, and his eagle-like eyes were fixed on the holographic image. "Go directly through the Surigao Strait and land on Leyte Island." According to the two lines drawn by Jiang Chen, the Moro army will land in Tacloban, the capital of Leyte province, with the support of starring trade. This will cut off the supply of the Philippine army stationed on Leyte Island north of the Surigao Strait, and at the same time, occupy the key point leading to Samar Island. Once Samar Island is captured, Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines, will open its door. At that time, the Philippine president will have no choice but to go into exile abroad. "That's right." Jiang Chen nodded. "The plan is very feasible." Ivan nodded. "What about the Philippine army landing on Mindanao Island?" an officer asked. "We can only hope that the Moro guerrillas will be one step ahead. Air supremacy is on our side. As long as they are not stupid, it will not be difficult to get rid of the Philippine guerrillas." After a pause, Ivan looked at the officers and said in a sonorous and powerful voice, "Prepare a landing operation plan immediately. Within 3 days, plant our flag on the Tacloban city government building." Yes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 829 Leyte Island Landing Battle. At 1431 on July 21st, the 1st Armored Brigade and the 6th Infantry Brigade of the Republic of Moro entered the Surigao area, and the Crescent Island Command took over the command and began to board the ship. At 1600 hours, the spokesperson of Starring Trade announced to the media that it would intervene in the self-defense counterattack of the Republic of Moro against the Philippines in the form of mercenaries. At 1730, the landing fleet carrying the 2 brigades set out from the Surigao port, bypassing the self-propelled coastal artillery formation deployed by the Philippines on the other side of the strait, and headed towards the Leyte Gulf area. While the land forces were operating, relying on the powerful computing power of quantum computers, Starring Trade launched a full-scale cyber attack on the Philippines. A large number of data packets marked with the word Nazi suddenly flooded the Philippine government website, not only replacing all the characters in the database, but also completely paralyzing the network server in 10 minutes. The photo of President Aquino IV was replaced by Hitler, and the national flag of the Philippines was replaced by the swastika flag, including media, communications, and transportation systems. 80% of the websites in the Philippines were paralyzed by the Starring Trade Network forces, which had a great impact on the Philippines' military operations and directly affected the Philippines' war mobilization and support capabilities. At 1732, 10 Aurora 20 fighters arrived above the target area first and fought for air supremacy with the 20 F-22 fighters that were urgently launched by the Philippines. Because the Philippine Army updated its ground air defense facilities including Patriot 3 with the assistance of the Rothschild family, the air battle was extremely tragic. After paying the price of 4 Aurora 20s, the Starring Trade Air Force shot down 15 F-22 fighters with an astonishing exchange ratio and successfully seized air supremacy over Leyte Island. At 2019, a whole row of Sea Lion Special Forces airborne in the mountainous area of central Leyte Island and launched a night battle with the 4th Air Defense Battalion of the Philippines deployed there, destroying 8 Patriot 3 air defense missiles deployed in the foothills, and killed a total of 211 Philippine soldiers with the cooperation of drones. After discovering the airborne landing of the Sea Lion Special Forces, the Philippines urgently transferred a mountain division from the southern defense line to the delivery site for support. At 2032, the Moro landing force that had completed its formation in Leyte Gulf began to attack. Under the airstrikes of the Aurora 20 and the suppression of the electromagnetic naval guns of the Guardian-class frigate, the 6th Infantry Brigade boarded landing craft and began to attack the beaches south of Tacloban City. Thunder exploded in the night sky, and the Aurora 20 dropped an imp bomb over Tacloban City. After a short air raid alarm, the entire city fell into a deathly silence. The entire city was enveloped by an electromagnetic pulse, and the scattered lights were extinguished, and the east coast of Leyte Island was completely plunged into darkness. The 2nd Mechanized Division of the Philippines was responsible for defending the area. After receiving the naval invasion alert, it immediately rushed to the front line. The imp attack came as expected, but after the communication equipment and armored units were treated against imp, they were not simply disorganized this time. What awaited Starring Trade and Moro was destined to be a fierce battle. With the roar of the motor and the roar of the raging waves, the first echelon of landing craft began to rush towards the Philippine position. The Philippines built a concrete fortress here, and the beach was equipped with anti-personnel mines and conical concrete piles to hinder the armored forces. Although the Air Force and the Navy carried out rounds of bombing in this area, it was obviously impossible for the Philippine Army to be stupid enough to cram all its troops into the trenches at once. Soldiers continued to die under the machine guns and bombs of the Aurora 20, but soon soldiers came to reinforce the defense line. Due to the loose formation, the landing operation was not as easy as the joint military exercise between Singapore and Malaysia. But it was not that difficult either. The sea was terribly quiet. Zhang Feng could not hear any sound, except the roar of the engine. As the 11th Battalion of the Starring Marine Corps, he and his team were included in the first echelon, and attacked the Philippine defense line with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Battalions of the 6th Infantry Brigade of Moro. This was not an exercise, and he was no longer an ordinary team member, but participated in this war as a captain. In the air, a dazzling fire exploded, and the orange-red illumination fire lit up the Philippine position. Immediately afterwards, the transport plane of Starring Trade dropped dozens of coffin-like black boxes to the Philippine position. When these black boxes hit the Philippine position heavily, the Filipinos had not reacted yet, and the windows on the side of the black boxes suddenly bounced open. With the hum of death, hundreds of hummingbirds rushed out of the drone hive and attacked the position of the 2nd Mechanized Division of the Philippines in the form of a drone swarm. Shit, I can't hit these birds. The machine gunner held the trigger tightly, firing at the drones on the beach 100 meters away, but no one knew whether they hit the target. Not far away, the drones were shuttling through the first line of defense, like the god of death waving his sickle, harvesting the Filipino soldiers hiding behind the bunkers. At such a close distance, Facing these drones that can't be hit at all, the butt of the gun is more effective than bullets. The enemy drones are landing on the beach. We can't hold on here. The soldier lying behind the sandbag pressed his helmet on his head and shouted loudly into the walkie-talkie. What are the idiots on the first line of defense doing? Turn on the KS-32 anti-drone system. Quick. It's already turned on. Damn it. This thing doesn't work at all. What? In the distance, fire flickered on the beach. The firepower of the accumulated fire dropped suddenly, and the sudden airborne drone group caught the Filipino soldiers off guard. In particular, the KS-32 anti-UAV system ordered by the Philippine Army from the United States was completely useless in the face of the scurrying hummingbird drones. The soldiers crawling on the landing craft had already opened the safety, fastened the nylon buckles of their helmets, and were ready for war. 50 meters left. Release the drone. Zhang Feng roared as he landed on the ground, slamming his arm against his chest. The drones popped out from the grooves on the chest of the exoskeleton and scattered from all sides of the landing craft. Jump off the boat. Get ready to fight. Yes, a howitzer exploded 5 meters in front of the landing craft, almost overturning the boat. Already close to the beach, the soldier quickly untied the safety belt tied to his body and flipped into the sea from the side of the landing craft. Adjust the power of the mechanical exoskeleton to the maximum and rush to the beach. The Moro army has rushed to the beach first, and with the support of a group of drones, it has started a battle for the defense line with the Philippine soldiers. At this time, the 2 frigates of Starring Trade also started a new round of naval artillery salvos. The mass bullet carried an orange-yellow trajectory, raising pieces of dust on the position of the 2nd Mechanized Division of the Philippines. Just when Zhang Feng led the team to rush to the beach, the battle on the beach was basically over. After the optical stealth was activated, the Sea Lion Special Forces successfully got rid of the pursuit and interception of the Philippine Mountain Division after solving the Patriot 3 anti-aircraft missiles. After seizing the vehicles, they crossed a distance of 12 kilometers and raided the positions of the Philippine 2nd Mechanized Division from the rear, leading the airstrike to destroy 12 hidden infantry vehicles and 4 M101 main battle tanks. The armored units suffered heavy losses, and more than half of the soldiers were killed or wounded. The Philippine soldiers began to retreat to Tacloban City. Don't kill me. I surrender. Mom, the real battlefield is much more cruel than the exercise. When Zhang Feng led the team into the trench behind the beach, it was already a bloody mess. The broken limbs and arms were mixed with the wreckage of the drone, and the lifeless bodies lay on the ground like rags. The Philippine soldiers who had lost their fighting spirit lay on the ground and raised their hands to surrender. There were also stubborn people who hid in the pile of corpses, waiting for people to approach and pull the grenade to die together. After killing a Filipino who rushed towards him with a rifle butt, Zhang Feng separated one person from the team to stay here to guard the prisoners, and then continued to pursue the retreating enemy with the rest of the team. After the control of the beach was taken, and the engineers dismantled the tank traps and anti-tank mines deployed on the beach, the 1st Armored Brigade of Moro began to land. The subsequent 5th Mechanized Division of Moro has also boarded the transport ship and is advancing towards the defense line of Leyte Island. At the same time, the Starring Trade Command issued a new combat order. It is imperative to capture Tacloban City and the cross-sea highway connecting the north with Samar Island before dawn the next day, and completely cut off the supply of the Philippine Army deployed in the north of Leyte Island. Chapter 830 The First Sunrise. In the early morning of July 22nd, the 1st Armored Brigade of the Republic of Moro and the 4th Armored Brigade of the Philippines met in the suburbs of Tacloban and engaged in a fierce exchange of fire. The Philippines deployed a total of 70 tanks, 120 infantry fighting vehicles, 10 self-propelled artillery, and 30 self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. The tank unit includes 20 M101 main battle tanks and various American armored vehicles. In addition, there is a reinforced support battalion to provide battlefield support. On the other hand, the Republic of Moro has deployed 60 tanks, 150 infantry vehicles, and 20 self-propelled artillery. Among them, the main battle tanks are mainly T-80, and most of the tanks are the relatively backward T-72. Although there is a lack of armored strength, the addition of the Starring Trade Armored Forces has obviously reversed this situation. The Jagdtiger II with a Type steel front armor is equipped with a Type 50 electromagnetic gun, which is simply a tank destroyer on the battlefield. Although the tanks independently developed by the Doomsday researchers lack experience in armored combat, the leading technology still fills the gap in actual combat experience. The armor-piercing shells of the M101 can only cause damage to the side armor and turret of the Jagdtiger II, and the armor of the M101 can basically be destroyed by the Type 50 electromagnetic gun, as long as the angle of impact is not too tricky. At the same time, before the two sides came into close contact, the artillery unit of Starring Trade took the lead in using the Fireball 1 and launched hundreds of EMP rockets on the battlefield. But what's interesting is that although the anti-drone equipment is useless, the anti-EMP weapons purchased by the Philippines from the United States are unexpectedly effective. When the rockets of Starring Trade were launched, gray-white smoke immediately sprayed out of the armored units of the Philippines. This smoke is composed of droplets with special content and diameter, forming a simple Faraday cage within the range of the white fog, which plays a role in EMP defense for the electronic equipment wrapped in it. However, the shortcomings of this primitive anti-EMP method are also very obvious. After being attached by droplets, the communication equipment of tanks and armored vehicles will fail for a period of time due to physical electromagnetic shielding. But it must be said that it is still very effective in terms of saving lives. At least this time, the Philippine Army did not lose the organization of the entire division after being hit by a round of EMP salvos from the Starring Trade like last time. After coming into contact with the armored forces of the Moro Kingdom and the Starring Trade, they at least had a certain ability to fight back. But it was only the ability to fight back. The road from the beach to Tacloban City was full of tank ruins with flames on the top. Some belonged to M101, and some belonged to T-80 or T-72. In this tank battle, a total of hundreds of tanks were scrapped. More than half of them belonged to the Philippines, and a small number belonged to the Moro Kingdom. As for the Starring Trade, the only loss was a Jagdtiger II that was hit on the top by the supporting artillery and exploded. The rest of the tanks had their tracks broken, or their turrets damaged at most, and there was no direct destruction by the M101. After dealing with the 1st Armored Brigade of the Philippines, the 5th Mechanized Division of the Moro Kingdom that landed on the island began to advance towards Tacloban City at full speed. The Sea Lion Special Forces took a Black Hawk helicopter to the north to blow up the highway and prevent the Philippine defenders on Leyte from retreating. Starring Trade deployed a brigade of troops to Leyte Island, formed a group with the troops participating in the landing operation, and quickly rushed to the edge of the city in infantry vehicles, and launched a fierce exchange of fire with the Philippine army entrenched there. Most of the civilians in the city have been evacuated, and only a small number of people have not had time to evacuate. The city of Tacloban after the EMP attack is like a dead city. Rows of high-rise buildings are like tombstones, silently overlooking the soldiers who broke into the city and the humble sparks left by the explosives. After the outer defense line of the city was defeated, the Philippine soldiers have begun to evacuate into the city, preparing to engage in street fighting with Starring Trade. Walking beside the armored vehicle of Moro, Zhang Feng held the Ripper rifle and carefully looked at the windows around him. 8 Hummingbird drones hovered around the armored vehicle, alerting for rocket launchers that might extend from the window or explosives thrown from the roof. Suddenly, a rocket with a tail flame rushed towards the armored vehicle, blowing up the reactive armor hanging on the left side of the armored vehicle. An enemy anti-tank team was found on the roof. 4 o'clock, shoot them down. The fireman threw himself behind the bunker, set up a light machine gun, and fired at the window on the roof. Seeing that the attack failed, the enemy immediately retreated. The target is moving. You want to run, after pretending to be cool. Damn it, chase them. Zhang Feng cursed, while issuing combat orders through the holographic screen, assigning 2 team members to go upstairs and eliminate the anti-tank team. At this moment, bullets suddenly came from the opposite street. The Filipino soldiers crouching behind the shopping street set up their machine guns and rifles and fired at Zhang Feng's team. Caught off guard, the rifleman standing in the front row was shot twice in the chest. Fortunately, the polyethylene armor blocked it and saved his life. Hide. Get behind the bunker. Quick. After firing 2 shots at the opposite street, Zhang Feng leaned against the concrete wall and marked the enemy target with the drone. This is the 121st Squadron. Enemy forces have been spotted in the southern part of Tacloban City. The estimated size is 40 people. Requesting airstrike support. Shooter 3 received. The airstrike will begin in 2 minutes. Please mark the enemy unit. The target has been marked. Received. An Aurora 20 hovering in the air changed its course and flew towards the target area. The armored vehicle in the middle of the street was reversing, while the machine gun turret on top was spitting flames at the opposite shopping street. The glass of the store was shattered all over the floor. The 20mm large caliber ammunition easily tore the concrete blocks off the steel frame and nailed the Philippine infantry squad to the ground. After the communication ended, Zhang Feng glanced at the airstrike countdown on the holographic screen on his arm, then leaned out of the bunker with his rifle, turned on the thermal imaging function on the scope, and used burst shooting to cooperate with the suppression of the armored vehicles to clear the Filipino soldiers hiding behind the bunker. The airstrike countdown returned to 0. In an instant, the commercial street, where the Filipino soldiers were hiding, was crushed to the ground by the rain of bullets falling from the sky, as if a storm had passed. The dust spread all around, and blew to a place 2 streets away. When Zhang Feng saw the figure of the Aurora 20 whizzing past, he heard the roar of the machine gun. Clear. Zhang Feng roared, holding the rifle, and walked out of the bunker. Shit, you splashed dust all over my face. You should be glad that the one who shot you in the face was not something else. Hey man, don't say such unlucky words. The rifleman who was crawling behind the concrete pier stood up with his rifle, pointed at his body, wiped his face and cursed. Zhang Feng grinned, lent a hand to his comrade, and then knocked on the armored vehicle. Keep going. With the support of airstrikes, all resistance forces are paper tigers. When the city center is taken, the Filipino soldiers who remain in the city will be completely cut off by the armored forces of the Moro Kingdom. Either throw away their weapons and military uniforms and become civilians, or they will be killed or captured. But at this moment, a light appeared in the distance. Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes slightly and looked in the direction of the flashing light. The rifleman next to him was also attracted by the light and murmured, "Shit, what is that?" The night sky was lit up, just like the sunrise. Chapter 831 The Second Mushroom Cloud. A mushroom cloud rose from the sky above Tacloban City, and a halo of radiation illuminated the faces of both the enemy and us. At this moment, whether it was the Filipino soldiers lying behind the sandbag bunkers, or the Moroccan soldiers advancing with the tanks, they all stopped pulling the trigger and cast their eyes on the lit sky in the city center. Nuclear weapons turned all resistance and attack into a meaningless game. When the shockwave swept through the streets, both the enemy and the friendly forces were steamed into ashes by the scorching airwaves. This is the command center. Please answer when you hear it. Zizzy, please answer when you hear it. Zhang Feng opened his blurry eyes and clenched his teeth, but still couldn't help coughing up blood. At this moment, his condition was not good. The glass shards around him were shattered all over the ground, and there were broken pots and soil everywhere at hand. At this moment, the whole person was trapped in the wooden cabinet. It seems that, when the nuclear strike came, he was thrown into a flower shop by the shockwave. Outside the broken window, the armored vehicle overturned on the side of the road. The turret had been completely cut off, and flames were quietly jumping on the spilled fuel. Too miserable. After removing the stone pressing on the armor on his chest, Zhang Feng stood up from the ground with difficulty. When the shockwave swept the street, his chest felt like it was hit by a truck. Fortunately, he was protected by a mechanical exoskeleton and was still several kilometers away from the center of the explosion. Otherwise it would not be just a simple internal injury. Ahem. Supported by a rifle, Zhang Feng walked to the side, picked up his tactical helmet, and put it on. This is the 121st team. We may have encountered a nuclear attack. This is the command center. Please organize personnel immediately after receiving it and withdraw to the landing point. Understood. Nuclear bombs. Why are there nuclear bombs? With victory in hand, Starring Trade obviously could not use such weapons of mass destruction. Air supremacy is in the hands of Starring Trade. In this case, the nuclear bombs should be pre-installed by the Philippines in Tacloban City. But why does the Philippines have nuclear bombs? And they actually use them in their own city? Exclamation mark. Are they crazy? Zhang Feng couldn't figure it out. The only thing he could confirm was that more than half of his team was killed or wounded in an instant. If he, who was at the edge of the city, had been hit by such a terrifying shock, then the 5th Mechanized Division of the Moro Kingdom, which had already rushed into the city, was probably in danger. The Philippine army was retreating to Samar Island, and Tacloban was the only way. If he didn't want to be captured, he had to withdraw to the landing point immediately. Within a month, 2 mushroom clouds, one large and one small, rose from the earth. The nuclear explosion in Tacloban City caused a panic around the world that was no less than the biochemical crisis some time ago. For a long time, people had only felt the power of nuclear weapons in movies. However, at this moment, all this happened in reality. Although it was just a few words in the newspaper and the scarlet bright spot in the satellite aerial photography, the shock it brought to people was far greater than all the film and television works since the Cold War. Last night, a nuclear explosion occurred in Tacloban. Please wait, I have to confirm whether the press release is wrong. According to the data released by the Philippines, the first confirmed death toll has exceeded 20,000, including 13,000 civilians who have not yet evacuated. However, this number was refreshed by 50,000 2 hours later. The specific information can be seen on the official website of the Philippine government. If Starring Trade stops its cyber attacks on the Philippines, the spokesperson of the Philippine Presidential Office said that the nuclear explosion was caused by Morocco and the source of the nuclear bomb was Starring Trade. However, Morocco gave a completely opposite answer, accusing the Philippines of detonating a nuclear bomb in Tacloban. Nuclear weapons are proliferating. How many countries are illegally holding nuclear weapons outside the framework of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Convention? We must end this unstable situation, which concerns the lives of everyone on Earth. 5 hours after the nuclear explosion, the news spread to the world in an instant. NASA first released a satellite picture, in which a bright spot suddenly flashed at the location of Leyte Island, which could be clearly seen in outer space. This satellite image was also used by major media as the only picture to report the power of nuclear weapons. At present, the control of Tacloban City is still under dispute, and there is strong nuclear radiation left, so no reporters can enter the area. It's crazy. They actually took out the nuclear weapons directly. Ivan punched the table hard and said angrily with a ferocious expression, "I was tricked." Jiang Chen frowned. More than half of the 11,000 Moro army was lost, and a brigade of more than 2,000 soldiers of the Starring Trade had a total of 431 killed and 1,107 injured to varying degrees. At present, all combat units have withdrawn to the landing point. Seizing the opportunity, the Philippine garrison stationed on Leyte Island, with the support of artillery fire, launched a crazy counterattack against the positions of Moro and Starring Trade. Since the artillery is deployed in the foothills of the central part of Leyte Island and is covered by a large number of anti-aircraft machine guns, it is very difficult to carry out airstrikes. The 2 frigates deployed in the coastal area launched a counterattack on the local artillery positions, but due to the terrain factors, it had little effect. At this moment, the headquarters was discussing this matter. All officers, including Jiang Chen and Ivan, did not sleep all night. Why do they have nuclear weapons? When did the Philippines become a nuclear-armed country? Is it the Freemasons? Israel is a secret nuclear-armed country. If the Jewish consortium has enough influence in Israel, there is no reason why they can't get nuclear weapons. But what exactly do they want to do? Frame up, and even drag the United Nations into this civil war. The logistics chief Bakary, who had been silent all the time, suddenly spoke. The command table fell silent, and everyone, including Ivan and Jiang Chen, turned their eyes to him. That makes sense. Jiang Chen nodded. Bakary's words made him react. At this moment, an officer entered the command center and walked straight to the command table. The Philippines demands a ceasefire, and both sides return to their respective actual control areas and wait for the results of the United Nations investigation. Investigation? What investigation? Jiang Chen asked with a frown. About which side used nuclear weapons first? The officer who delivered the message said with an ugly face. Both sides accused the other side of using nuclear weapons, and both sides had their own reasons for absolutely not using nuclear weapons. Morocco obviously has the upper hand, and it is impossible for them to drop a nuclear bomb on their own people. Although the Philippines is at a disadvantage, it is impossible for them to use nuclear bombs on their own citizens. In addition, both warring parties are non-nuclear countries. In order to investigate the source of nuclear weapons, the United Nations has held an emergency meeting and announced that it will intervene in this civil war. However, at this moment, Jiang Chen suddenly realized a serious problem. Ceasefire. What about the areas occupied by the Philippine guerrillas? Chapter 832. There is no war without sacrifice. The Philippines proposed that the northern part of Mindanao, which was occupied by the guerrillas, was under the actual control of the Philippines and should be temporarily managed by the Philippines. As a disputed area of war and a nuclear attack, Leyte should be taken over by the UN peacekeeping force. Both sides should take a step back and withdraw their troops from Leyte. Before the officer in charge of conveying the message finished speaking, Ivan was furious. This is not a step back at all. This is a naked conspiracy. Compared to Ivan's anger, Jiang Chen's expression seemed much calmer. He finally understood that the Philippines sending guerrillas to Mindanao was not a suicidal war of attrition, to abandon the supply line, but to form a form of actual control over the region. Then, through external factors, the United States or the United Nations will take action to force the war to end. And this ceasefire line will draw the entire northern part of Mindanao to the Philippines. Use the 3 divisions deployed across the Surigao Strait as bait to lure us to launch a landing on Leyte Island, to cut off the supply of these 3 divisions. Leave a brigade of troops in Tacloban City to slow down our advance, and then when we almost seize control of Tacloban City, detonate the nuclear bomb hidden in the city center. Jiang Chen put his finger on his chin and whispered while thinking. We have air supremacy and sea supremacy. From the beginning, the Philippines did not intend to win this war on the battlefield, but planned to decide the outcome outside the battlefield. If it enters the International Court of Justice, the United Nations will be responsible for reviewing which party used nuclear weapons. Obviously, if it goes to court, the Freemasons, who have a wider sphere of influence, will obviously have a greater chance of winning. Regardless of the result of the ruling, the Moro Kingdom will lose control of northern Mindanao. From the beginning, they planned to detonate this nuclear bomb. How much time will the United Nations give us? Jiang Chen looked at the officer who summoned the message. 24 hours. The officer said nervously. The observers sent by the United Nations have expressed a very tough stance. If we cannot achieve a ceasefire within 24 hours, the United Nations will authorize the permanent members to forcibly intervene in the regional situation. 24-hour ceasefire? They started the war, but now they are saying they want a ceasefire. An officer cursed. Fuck the United Nations. This is unfair. Shit. We in Morocco can never accept such a result. Absolutely not. The officer from Morocco cursed. Now is not the time to complain. Jiang Chen's fingers tapped the table heavily, interrupting the voice on the command table, and his sharp eyes swept across the pairs of eyes beside the command table. Everyone, we still have 24 hours. Think carefully, what can we do in these 24 hours? At this point, Jiang Chen paused and stretched out 2 fingers. Generally speaking, there are only 2 situations for a ceasefire. Both sides lay down their weapons and retreat to the ceasefire line. Or, one of the parties surrenders. What do you mean? We go directly to the capital of the Philippines. Jiang Chen pointed his finger at the holographic map, erased the original offensive route, and drew a red cross directly at the location of Manila. Before the UN court opens, try the war criminals who detonated the nuclear bomb. All the officers at the command table held their breath for a moment and looked at each other. The silence lasted for nearly half a minute, and no one said a word. This is crazy. Ivan couldn't help but speak, breaking the silence at the command table. However, unlike the doubts he raised, his eyes flashed with enthusiasm for the plan proposed by Jiang Chen. Yes, this is crazy. Jiang Chen nodded, slapped his hand on the command table, his eyes swept across the faces, and squeezed out the last sentence from his teeth, word by word. But remember, they were the first to go crazy. The underground bunker in Manila. This is a temporary command center of the Philippine National Army. because of the loss of air superiority, in order to prevent the Aurora 20 of the starring trade from launching an airstrike on the capital, the Ministry of Defense, Congress, and the Presidential Palace all moved in temporarily to maintain the operation of the army and government agencies. Asshole, what the hell did you do? It was you who did it, right? Answer me. Marshal Stark, the Minister of Defense of the Philippines, kicked open the door of his office, took 2 steps forward, and grabbed the collar of the military advisor Moritz. However, the latter just looked at him indifferently, allowing the gray-haired old man to grab his collar tightly. I don't understand what you mean. A nuclear explosion in Tacloban. Who else could possibly take out nuclear weapons except you Jews? Marshal Stark roared angrily, spitting. Please be careful with your words, said Moritz, a military advisor from Germany, while taking his hand off his collar. There are many countries that possess nuclear weapons, either openly or secretly. Although there is no evidence, we can also assume that the new country has nuclear weapons. Bullshit. Stark cursed. They already have the upper hand, but they still want to pull out nuclear bombs? Using 13,000 people to exchange for a brigade of 2,000 people, even if they are commanded by pigs, they can't make such a stupid and absurd decision. But this is the fact. It was a nuclear bomb dropped by the bomber of starring trade. We have no evidence, but they don't either. They have air supremacy, and the nuclear bomb can't fall by itself. That's a city. A city where 100,000 civilians have not yet evacuated. I'm not talking about the soldiers who are still fighting in the streets with the Moro country. That's 100,000 people. 100,000 unarmed civilians. Marshal Stark's eyes were red and his teeth were almost broken. But this is a war. Moritz said lightly. The office fell silent. Marshal Stark's chest rose and fell violently, like a caged beast, with roars coming out of the corners of his mouth and nostrils. The United Nations will intervene, and both sides will cease fire for 24 hours. The peacekeeping force will take over the nuclear-struck Leyte Island. The entire northern part of Mindanao will return to the control of the Philippines, because the guerrillas have actual control over the area. At this point, Moritz paused and reached out to adjust the collar of the old man in front of him. Since it has happened, I think we'd better speak with one voice. Those who died. There is no war that can be won without sacrifice. I asked you from the beginning how much awareness you have. Now I tell you that your dead compatriots are all necessary sacrifices to win this war. A drop of cold sweat slid down Stark's forehead, and he said with trembling lips, "You lunatic. You can't be allowed to command the Philippine army. I will apply to the president to revoke your command. The command can be returned to you. Anyway, there are only 24 hours left. The Moro country should launch a crazy counterattack against the guerrillas in the north of Mindanao. At this time, we only need to maintain continuous landing on Mindanao and support the guerrillas through the artillery positions deployed on Bohol Island to hold on to our fruits of victory." At this moment, the piercing alarm interrupted Moritz's words. Moritz frowned slightly and looked at the door. "What's that sound?" Stark looked up at the concrete ceiling and muttered, "It's the air defense alarm. Air raid?" Moritz frowned. It has come to this point. What's the use of air raiding Manila? I hope. For some reason, Stark said such words. However, his intuition told him that things might be far from as simple as an air raid. Chapter 833 Codename, Punishment. The code name of the operation was Punishment. The combat mission was simple. Control the Philippine Presidential Palace, Congress, Supreme Court, Ministry of National Defense, and other important facilities, and capture war criminal Aquino IV, Defense Minister Marshal Stark, and German military advisor Moritz. A 3,000-man reinforced airborne brigade was dispatched by the Moro country, and a 2,000-man airborne brigade and a drone attack group consisting of 8,000 hummingbirds were dispatched by starring trade to launch a large-scale airborne operation against Manila, the capital of the Philippines. There was only 24 hours. At 3 a.m. on July 23rd, the Dolphin 10 ballistic missile was launched from an underwater missile silo deployed in the western Pacific and detonated in the airspace of central Luzon Island. The EMP strike covered most of Luzon Island. Manila was completely blacked out, and traffic was completely paralyzed. Subsequently, the Aurora 20 flew to the airspace and fought fiercely with the 10 F-22s and 5 F-35s that were launched, completely seizing air supremacy over Manila. The Sea Lion Special Forces then landed on Luzon Island and infiltrated and destroyed the Patriot 3 and other air defense systems, paving the way for the airborne troops. When everything was ready, the paratroopers of the 2 Brigade set off from the Davao Port Airport and arrived over Luzon Island at 5 AM, starting the large-scale airborne operation called Punishment. The task of delivering paratroopers was 30 Il-76 transport aircraft. A long time ago, Jiang Chen ordered this large transport aircraft from Russia through Natasha at a unit price of $20 million to quickly deploy combat units. Although there are better aircraft available in the end of the world, those things are temporarily on the drawing board. At present, the production capacity of the future military industry is temporarily insufficient to achieve large-scale mass production. In order to reduce civilian casualties, Jiang Chen specially set the start time of the operation at night. Before noon is the deadline set by the United Nations for the warring parties. As long as the Philippine command system is disintegrated before noon, the Philippine president and half of the members of Congress are arrested, and they are forced to sign a surrender agreement immediately. The war can be declared over. With the defeat of the Philippines, a ceasefire will be achieved between the two sides. The roar of the engine and the whistling of the cold wind outside the steel shell. With their backs against the cold cabin, in the Il-76 transport plane, 2 rows of fully armed soldiers sat neatly. The black exoskeleton armed them to the teeth, and the ink-colored glass on the digital helmets revealed a murderous aura. The fuselage shook violently, and the nose of the plane slightly raised up. The signal lights in the cabin lit up one by one, and the fingers neatly opened the safety, and then picked up the nylon buckle behind them. At this moment, they have arrived above Manila. The officer walked to the center of the cabin, stretched out his hand to pull the hook, stood there steadily, and made the final mobilization. The monkeys have detonated a nuclear bomb in their own city. Now, we are going to catch the person who pressed the button. Land, confirm the position, lock the target, shoot, kill those with guns, don't shoot civilians. Advance towards the mission target, it's that simple. Now, check the equipment, and get ready to go. He was responded to by a uniform roar. There was no need to mobilize at all, and everyone was in high spirits. The Philippines must pay the price for the 431 brothers who died in the nuclear explosion, and the blood debt must be paid with blood. The light of hatred flashed in the eyes of every soldier. The signal light turned from red to green, and the door of the cabin slowly opened. Above the clouds, 2 fighter planes whizzed past. The airwaves rolled into the cabin, and through the layers of white clouds, it could be clearly seen that the tracer bullets of the anti-aircraft guns were sweeping the air, in vain to drive away the aurora that was raging in the airspace. Not far away, the 31st Airborne Brigade of the Moro Kingdom had begun parachuting, and the sky was filled with parachute bags. Airborne Manila, the capital of the Philippines, to end this war within 24 hours. Now, jump. Quick. With the roar of the commander, the soldiers wearing exoskeletons jumped out of the cabin one after another. Unlike the paratroopers of Moro country, they airdropped to an altitude of about 200 meters. The slow descent device mounted on the back of the exoskeleton was activated, and a faint blue flame spurted out. The paratroopers of Starring Trade cut off the parachute behind them, and directly stepped heavily on the concrete road or the top of the high-rise building under the cushioning of the short-range rocket jet. The sky was already dawning, and under the high-rise buildings, the citizens of Manila screamed and ran away. Traffic was in chaos as early as the first round of EMP strikes. When the paratroopers began to airdrop, the whole city was in chaos. Even the police in Manila threw away their guns and batons, joined the fleeing team, and ran wildly towards the subway station. Occasionally, 1 or 2 blind patriots picked up pistols, but were soon locked and shot by the drones that landed first. Anyone with a weapon will be regarded as a combatant. The paratroopers of Moro landed first and immediately engaged in a firefight with the 11th Guards Brigade of the Philippines and the Philippine Anti-Terrorism Forces who came from near Manila. The flames of the explosion filled the streets and alleys of Manila, and the broken down armored vehicles were abandoned casually on the roadside. After landing, the soldiers of Starring Trade immediately opened the holographic map on the digital helmet. The nearest gathering place and attack route were mapped out by the AI of the quantum computer and intuitively marked on the holographic map. Everyone entered the combat state in the shortest possible time. The Philippine soldiers who rushed to the city for support became the ones who had to deal with it hastily. No one expected that Starring Trade would come up with such a radical and risky strategy, airdropping 2 brigades directly into Manila instead of concentrating on clearing the guerrillas on Mindanao. In the war, Starring Trade used crawler robots for the first time as infantry fire support platforms, using short-range rockets and small-caliber grenades to pour fire on Philippine soldiers. The two sides exchanged fire in shopping malls, bus stations, highways, office buildings and other places, competing for control of the main traffic arteries in the city. The battle was extremely tragic. Because the battle took place in the city and in the capital, the Philippines could not use artillery to support the frontline troops and could only dispatch the armored battalion stationed nearby to send tanks and armored vehicles to clear the airborne troops of Moro. However, air supremacy was in the hands of Starring Trade. Faced with a rain of bullets from the sky, the ground units of the Philippines were like chickens under the claws of an eagle and could only flee in panic. As long as they were marked on the map, a bomb or a shuttle of machine guns would soon fly over and blast them into a pile of scrap copper and rotten iron. In order to avoid the lock of Aurora 20, a Philippine armored vehicle directly reversed and rushed into the National Bank of the Philippines. However, the air-to-ground missile still hit the target, and the flames of the explosion blew the entire bank door into pieces. In order to end the battlefield battle as soon as possible, Starring Trade can no longer care about civilian casualties. Anyway, they participated in the war as mercenaries, and the Moro Kingdom was the one to take the blame in the end. What's more, the Philippine government itself doesn't care. In addition to investing a brigade of troops, Starring Trade also airdropped 1,000 drone hives to Manila, released a total of 8,000 hummingbird drones, and programmed 16 groups of drone swarms to clear the Philippine ground units. These drone swarms are like locusts passing through, and wherever they pass, there is a mess. Looking down at the earth from space, the whole of Manila seems to have been ravaged by a fire. The smoke of war has been burning from the suburbs to the city center, burning into the square in front of the Malacanang Palace, the presidential palace, and burning into the underground bunkers where senior officials such as Aquino IV are hiding. Chapter 834, Occupation of Manila. The temporary bunker is located underground in Malacanang Palace, about 500 meters deep, and can defend against nuclear strikes. The original intention of its design was to prevent the Philippine government and command system from being paralyzed even in an emergency. However, at this moment, this underground bunker has become a grave dug by the Philippines for itself. The Sea Lion Special Forces led by Garrett exchanged fire with the Philippine Presidential Guard in the square in front of Malacanang Palace. From the beginning of the assault to the surrender of the last Presidential Guard soldier, less than 10 minutes passed in total. All the staff in the Presidential Palace surrendered, squatting by the wall with their hands on their heads. Turning on the radio life signal detection device, Garrett quickly found the entrance to the underground bunker and led the Sea Lion Special Forces to attack. There was almost no resistance along the way. Defense Minister Marshal Stark and President Aquino IV surrendered one after another. In the last room of the underground bunker, knowing that the situation was hopeless, German military advisor Moritz shot himself. At 10 AM, Aquino IV stood in front of the camera in frustration and broadcast to the entire Philippines from the presidential palace, announcing his surrender. At 10:30, the Philippine artillery positions along the coast of Bohol officially ceased fire. At 11:30, the 14th, 15th, and 17th Mountain Brigades, which were fighting with the Moro Kingdom in northern Mindanao, successively raised white flags and surrendered to the Moro Kingdom's 2nd Mountain Division. At 11:40, the 3 Philippine divisions on Leyte Island also announced their surrender one after another, surrendering to the 5th Mechanized Division that was entrenched on the beach. The 5th Mechanized Division then sent a regiment to receive weapons and equipment, and sent a battalion equipped with radiation protection suits to Tacloban City to search for survivors. 2 minutes before 12 o'clock, the Moro Kingdom announced the end of the war, and this self-defense counterattack against the Philippines ended with the defeat of the invaders. Surrounded by a circle of bodyguards in suits and sunglasses, Jiang Chen and President Zhang walked side by side through the special passage of the airport. Starring Trade has already taken control of Manila, and now he needs to go to the Philippines immediately to contact the UN observers. The Moroccan country cannot occupy the Philippines for a long time, and he must use the limited time to gain more benefits for Starring Trade. The White House condemned our use of intercontinental ballistic missiles and large-scale EMP weapons in the war. It claims that these weapons not only caused irreparable damage to the Manila city power grid, but also caused devastating damage to civilian facilities. France, Germany and other countries condemned us. You don't need to report to me about the condemnation. Have they taken any substantive actions? Jiang Chen said as he walked towards the Gulfstream G650 parked on the runway. Not yet. Zhang Yaping replied. Not yet. In other words, do you plan to wait until the peace talks are over? Jiang Chen nodded, said nothing, and took the lead in boarding the plane that had already entered the runway. At 15:30, the Gulfstream G650 carrying Jiang Chen and the new country's dignitaries flew to Manila International Airport. Stationed here are the 11th Airborne Brigade of the Moroccan country and the 1st Armored Brigade that landed later. In order to avoid the UN's request for immediate withdrawal, Jiang Chen evilly ordered the Philippine police system to be disbanded on the spot. At the same time, he opened the prison on the pretext of making room for war criminals and released all criminals except terrorists, drug lords, and kidnappers. He also locked up all the congressmen and high-ranking Philippine government officials who were arrested and awaiting trial. Now, the security of the entire Manila depends on the army of the Moro country. In this state of anarchy, the Moro country can cease fire, but it is impossible to withdraw its troops unless the United Nations sends a brigade of peacekeeping troops to Luzon Island, but this is obviously unrealistic. Then, Jiang Chen ordered the use of truth serum on the Philippine president and the Minister of Defense, and all the secrets in his stomach were vomited out. After getting off the plane at Manila International Airport, the Sea Lion Special Forces took over the security work. Now the streets are very unsafe. From time to time, there are demonstrators who are overconfident and stand up to throw stones and Molotov cocktails at the soldiers at the checkpoints. In order to avoid being affected, Jiang Chen and a group of New Zealand politicians did not take the road, but took the Black Hawk helicopter that came to pick them up and flew directly to the Malacanang Palace. At the door of the Malacanang Palace, Jiang Chen met 3 special observers from the United Nations. 2 of them were Europeans, and the other was Jewish. Standing next to them were 2 peacekeepers wearing blue helmets. One was black and the other was Chinese. Jiang Chen could clearly feel that the Chinese peacekeeper holding the 95 submachine gun looked at him with admiration. Just a few hours ago, he did what they dreamed of doing. Smiling friendly to this compatriot, Jiang Chen walked up to the United Nations observer and politely extended his right hand. Welcome. This is not your territory, so you don't need to say welcome, the European said in English, but still extended his right hand. Olivier Rooney, from France, the UN observer in charge of this incident. These 2 are my assistants, Mr. Mangala and Mr. Kozakin. Without Mr. Rooney's coldness again, Jiang Chen smiled slightly, made a gesture of invitation to them, and then walked towards the presidential palace first. When he arrived at the presidential palace, a Sea Lion Special Forces soldier stepped forward, saluted neatly, and handed a future mobile phone to Jiang Chen. After pressing the phone twice casually, Jiang Chen's mouth curled up with a smile, threw the phone on the table in the presidential office, and then clicked on the holographic screen. Where is Mr. Aquino IV? I need to make sure he is not treated unfairly, Rooney said. No hurry, we are very civilized, much more civilized than some people. Jiang Chen waved his hand and tapped the holographic screen. Mr. Aquino is in prison, next to his father. But before meeting him, I hope we can watch a video together. Rooney frowned and was about to refuse, but the video had already started. In the screen, the soldiers of the Sea Lion Special Forces were interrogating Aquino IV. Because the video was very long, Jiang Chen dragged his finger on the screen and fast-forwarded the screen to the core part of the interrogation, about the nuclear weapons in Tacloban City. It was Moritz's idea. He told me that air and sea supremacy are in the hands of Starring Trade. If we want to win, we must consider ways other than war. "So you detonated a nuclear bomb in Tacloban City?" the soldier asked. When asked this question, Aquino Forth's expression twisted slightly, and it was obvious that he was quite resistant to this question. However, the truth serum is absolutely effective against humans. After the soldier repeated the question, his expression relaxed, and he answered calmly, "Yes, he told me that, as long as weapons of mass destruction are detonated in Tacloban, all permanent members of the United Nations will not sit idly by. As long as it is framed on Morocco and starring trade, we will be the winner of this war." Hearing this, the faces of the three observers changed. Jiang Chen was very keenly aware of this, but he said nothing, just smiled and continued to watch the picture on the holographic screen. "But you have lost now." The soldier smiled. "Yes," Aquino replied. "Okay, then the last question." The soldier turned a page of the notebook on the table and then asked, "Where do nuclear bombs come from?" Aquino's lips twitched at this question, showing a stronger resistance than before. However, the soldier ignored it and just raised his voice and repeated it. "Where do nuclear bombs come from?" This sentence was like a spell, knocking through Aquino's psychological defenses. This secret that must not be told was also exposed completely due to the effect of the truth serum. Israel. The video ended here, and there was an uproar in the presidential palace. Chapter 835, The Embarrassing White House. "This is impossible," Jewish observer Kozakin said angrily. "Israel does not have nuclear weapons, and it is impossible for it to provide nuclear weapons to other countries. You are lying in the first half of your sentence. Can I also understand the second half as, well, a lame lie?" Jiang Chen said with a smile, admiring the angry expression on his face. Israel is a nuclear protected country, which is almost an open secret in the international community. At this time, no matter how much he denied it, as a mere observer, he was not convincing at all. Olivier Rooney, an observer from France, looked at Jiang Chen coldly and said word by word, "I'm sorry, your interrogation is illegal, and the United Nations will not recognize illegal evidence. Only by ensuring that the person involved is conscious can we determine the authenticity of this evidence. As for how to characterize the conclusion of the nuclear issue, it must be investigated and collected by the United Nations observers. After all the evidence is collected, the trial will be held on a selected day." Facing Mr. Rooney's cold gaze, Jiang Chen just smiled indifferently and spread his hands and said, "Really? Then you can investigate it. I have uploaded the video to the internet. Starring Trade will also investigate the incident and conduct real-time follow-up reports on the official website." In an instant, the faces of the three observers changed, especially the Israeli observer Kozakin, whose expression was so wonderful that it could win an Oscar for comedy. Rooney blushed and pointed at Jiang Chen. What are you doing?" "What am I doing?" Jiang Chen raised his chin and stared at Rooney coldly. "I believe in the openness, fairness, and justice of the United Nations, so please show your sincerity and let me see that this is a trial without tinted glasses." With a slight shake of his eyes, Rooney chose to change the topic. That was obviously not in his favor. "Immediately transfer Aquino and Marshal Stark to the United Nations Court. This is the decision made by the Morpheus War Special Committee. They should be tried by the United Nations Court, and their guilt should be determined, not by a single party in the war. Before being tried under international law, they should first be tried by the Morpheus people, the victors of the fight against aggression against war criminals." Jiang Chen stared at Rooney's eyes and used a tone that could not be refused. "In addition, please pay attention to your words. This war was unilaterally provoked by the Philippines. It is called the Self-Defense Counter-Attack War against the Philippines, not some bullshit Morpheus war." Overwhelmed by Jiang Chen's aggressive momentum, Rooney's facial muscles stiffened like stones, and his throat felt as uncomfortable as if a ball of cotton was stuffed in it. The faces of the other two observers were also quite ugly. They did not expect Jiang Chen's reaction to be so strong. After a long time, he squeezed out a sentence. "I will convey your words to the United Nations." In terms of momentum, he couldn't help but be half a head shorter. "I look forward to the news you bring back." Jiang Chen stretched out his hand and made a gesture of invitation to the door. Rooney looked at Jiang Chen deeply, straightened his collar, and turned to leave with the other two observers. It was not a bluff. When the video was finished, Jiang Chen uploaded it to the official website of Starring Trade and reposted this interrogation video without any violence on major online platforms through the media, controlled by Future Group. After the interrogation video was released, the international community was in an uproar. For a time, the Philippines and Israel, which was suspected of providing nuclear weapons to the Philippines, stood at the forefront of public opinion. Russia and China condemned Aquino Fourth at the first time, and Russian President Putin bluntly expressed his opinion in front of reporters. Compared with the president, Aquino Fourth's behavior is more like a terrorist. The United States, which had previously strongly condemned Morocco, also fell into an embarrassing situation in public opinion. They turned a deaf ear to the Philippines' shelling of Cagayan City and accused the Ring Star trade of possibly causing civilian casualties in its airstrikes. After the nuclear crisis, they jumped out and sternly demanded that Ring Star Trade withdraw its troops immediately and expressed shock and disbelief to the media when Ring Star Trade's large-scale airborne operations were underway. Now it seems that their series of dramas to warm up for armed intervention are as funny as the Joker. It's not just the White House that is embarrassed, but also the protesters in Manila. In order to resist the invaders, they spontaneously formed protest groups of all sizes and threw rocks, bullets, and even firecrackers and other explosives at the Moro soldiers who occupied their capital through violent or non-violent means. However, after the video was released, their protest activities immediately fell into an embarrassing situation. The nuclear bomb was not dropped by the invaders' bomber as Aquino Fourth claimed, but was ordered to detonate the nuclear bomb by the president they loved. Facing the media's guns and cannons, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney held the press release in his hand, but his expression was quite nervous. Starring Trading used abnormal drug interrogation methods during the interrogation, which is illegal in the International Human Rights Convention. In addition, the interrogation itself did not comply with the procedures, and the United Nations Court should have questioned the parties involved. Please understand what I mean. I mean that everything must be done according to procedures, investigation, evidence collection, and court hearings. If we don't follow the procedures, what is the use of our laws? The person who wrote the speech did not write down in detail what he should say on paper, and the reporter's questions were quite tricky. Mr. Carney, do you mean that the interrogation video released by Starring Trading cannot be counted? Asked the reporter from the Times. I didn't say that. I just meant, well, the White House questioned the legality of the interrogation. But what we want to know is who was responsible for the nuclear explosion in Tacloban. Please answer our questions directly. It has not been concluded yet. Starring Trading has already released the interrogation video. What we want to know is not the White House's opinion on the interrogation process, but whether this matter was done by the Jews. Enough. Don't interrupt me. I want to ask your mother whether she has ever taught you the etiquette of a British gentleman. I said it has not been concluded yet. The White House is currently. Jay Carney finally exploded, pointing at the reporter who kept making things difficult for him and scolded him. However, as soon as he said this, he immediately regretted it. But it was too late. The next day, the photo of his gaffe was frozen on the cover of the Times, with a text caption. When asked whether the nuclear explosion in Tacloban was related to Israel, and whether the Jewish consortium played an ignominious role in the Murphy War, the White House spokesman was touched in the sore spot, and behaved quite irrationally. Although the White House avoided talking about this, it is not difficult for us to see that there may be some hidden secrets behind this. Public opinion is fermenting. However, at this moment, the White House can no longer care about these. 24 hours have passed since Starring Trade airborne Manila. The president and the chief of staff have not slept for a minute and have convened senior officials of the Ministry of Defense for more than a dozen consecutive meetings. It was not because of the situation in the Philippines. It was because of the imp launched from the bottom of the sea. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 836 2 seconds. In the conference room of the Pentagon, the seats at the conference table were all full. Those sitting here at the moment were almost the core of the American power class. Not only senior officials of the Department of Defense, but also politicians from the White House also rarely visited this conference room. Looking from the left-hand side of Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter, there were then President Hillary, her Chief of Staff, and the White House National Security Advisor. The atmosphere at the conference table was very depressing, and everyone's face was not very good. At this time, the door of the conference room was pushed open, and a young man in a suit walked in with a thick stack of documents in his hand. "Moral, you are late," Ashton Carter said dissatisfiedly. "Sorry, it took some time to print these materials. Where is my seat? There are a lot of people today." Sighing, Mr. Carter looked at the assistant standing next to him. "Move a chair for Mr. Morrill." "Okay." The assistant nodded and turned to walk out the door. Hillary exchanged glances with her chief of staff and then looked at Ashton. "Now that everyone is here, can we get started?" "Of course." Ashton nodded and looked at Morrill. "Then, let's get started, starting with the page about the Guam military base." "Okay, boss." Morrill immediately turned the document to the page about the Guam military base, not caring about the lack of a chair, and just stood by the table and read. At 3 a.m. on July 24th, the Dolphin 10 ballistic missile of starring trade was launched from an underwater missile silo in the western Pacific. When the missile rose to the stratosphere, it briefly appeared on the THAAD anti-missile system deployed at the Guam military base. Briefly appeared? Hillary raised her eyebrows, tapped the notebook lightly with her pen, and interrupted Morrill's speech. "I want to know how many minutes this brief moment was." Hearing this question, Morrill's expression suddenly became awkward, and he subtly glanced at his immediate superior, Ashton. However, the latter did not understand, but just said impatiently, "The president is asking you questions. Don't waste our time." "Yes." Morrill nodded quickly and looked at Hillary. After hesitating for a moment, he finally made up his mind to tell everyone present the truth. 2 seconds. The conference room fell silent. Although it had always been quiet, Morrill felt a dead silence at this moment. "Thank you." Taking the chair from the assistant, Morrill breathed a sigh of relief, whispered a thank you, and sat on the chair. He really didn't want to endure the feeling of being focused on him for even a second. The silence lasted for a long time at the conference table, and Hillary broke the silence and looked at Ashton and said, "Tell me if the budget of the Ministry of Defense is not enough. There is no need to play tricks in this kind of meeting." Ashton was confused and had not yet recovered from the number of 2 seconds. 2 seconds? How is this possible? Since the Moro War of Independence, when starring trade used intercontinental missiles to force the United States to make concessions, the United States has strengthened its anti-missile deployment at the Guam military base. Not only did they deploy the most advanced THAAD system at the Guam military base, but they also updated the radar of the original Patriot 3 air defense system. But now, the person in charge of the Guam military base told him that they only observed it for 2 seconds, and it was during the acceleration phase of the missile rising from the launch point to the low orbit, when the missile was most easily captured by radar and intercepted. Seeing that his boss didn't speak for a long time, Morrill felt that he had to help his boss out, so he continued to speak. "No, this has nothing to do with the budget. The Dolphin 10 has a high level of anti-detection. Not only us, but our ally Japan didn't even notice that starring trade used ballistic missiles. What on earth did you do with a budget of $600 billion every year? How come you can't even catch the missiles of a tiny country?" A White House official couldn't help but curse. "This can't be blamed entirely on us. We are developing anti-missile technology, and they are also upgrading ballistic missile technology. Haha, explain to the taxpayers." The meeting table was in a mess, and Hillary, who spoke first, fell silent at this time. Using intercontinental missiles to attack a neighboring country that is only a few hundred kilometers away is no different from using a cannon to shoot a mosquito. It is obvious that starring trade has ulterior motives. It is openly aimed at the Philippines, but in fact it challenges the detection capability of the THAAD system. If it cannot even detect the traces of missiles, let alone anti-missile defense, Hillary suddenly found pessimistically that, whether it was EMP or missile technology, starring trade seemed to be ahead of the United States. The tragedy in Manila has proved the terrifying lethality of EMP weapons to modern civilization. The whole city retreated to the Stone Age overnight, and everything from transportation to social order was destroyed. There was no pollution left, and no one would die, but the consequences would be more terrifying than killing tens of thousands of people. If EMP exploded in Los Angeles, Boston, or even Washington, Hillary couldn't imagine it, but one thing was certain. The economy of the entire world would decline for at least 20 years. Since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the national security situation of the United States has never been so severe. Immediately increase the research and development budget for anti-EMP technology. I don't want to wait until the EMP strike falls on us, and the only things that can move in the whole country are tanks and armored vehicles, and anti-missile systems. If THAAD doesn't work, then we will replace THAAD. Within 5 months, I ask the Pentagon to come up with a solution. If it doesn't work, then replace someone. Hillary stared at Ashton and said in a tone without any joke. The latter held his breath and nodded stiffly. I promise. Then, today's meeting is over. Hillary stood up. Seeing that Hillary was about to leave, Morrill, who had not yet finished his report, said hurriedly, wait, there is also the issue of cybersecurity. Regarding the cyber attack on the Philippines by starring trade, we sent cybersecurity experts to remotely assist the Philippine government in defense, and then we lost, right? Hillary looked at Morrill with a fake smile, and her crow's feet and narrowed eyes became a slit. I don't want to hear you report your incompetence. I hope you can come up with a solution as soon as possible. Yes. Morrill swallowed his saliva and nodded stiffly. Then, Hillary looked at her chief of staff. Help me adjust the schedule, cancel all the activities in the afternoon and evening, and free up the rest of the day. I have to go to the United Nations later, and EMP weapons must be restricted. I will go to the CIA later, and let Naomi Madden wait for me in the office. Okay. The chief of staff nodded. Also, send John Kerry to Manila. We have to talk to Jiang Chen. Chapter 837 Preemptive Strike. In downtown Manila, protesters are still clashing with Moroccan soldiers, but the morale of the protesters is not as strong as it was 2 days ago. The banner they are holding is to resist the invaders, and the slogans they are shouting are to support the leadership of President Aquino IV. However, the video released by Starring Trade made all the protesters taste the taste of betrayal. They have always believed that the leader they have always supported is the culprit who pressed the nuclear button in Tacloban. Suspicion breeds in the hearts of every Filipino citizen. Once these young people doubt the legitimacy of the former regime, all resistance forces will become paper tigers and will be vulnerable. The armored vehicles of the 1st Armored Brigade of Morocco, accompanied by infantrymen with their heads held high, passed through every main road in Manila. A high-powered radio is tied to the back of the armored vehicle, and every day on the streets of Manila, it repeatedly broadcasts the confessions of Aquino IV and Marshal Stark about the nuclear bomb incident in Tacloban. The sound echoing in the streets and alleys was like a curse, tormenting every patriot who had illusions and hopes for this country. They had already endured the pain of defeat, and now they had to be tortured by lies and betrayal, tasting this humiliation and pain. It really made the audience sigh. It really deserved it. Because the EMP paralyzed almost all electronic equipment in Manila, the entire city's water and electricity supply came to a standstill. Affected by this, the city's daily necessities also fell into a state of extreme scarcity. At present, international relief organizations have sent a total of 21,000 tons of relief supplies to the Philippines, including food, pills, and various daily necessities. Because the Philippine government has been paralyzed, this batch of relief supplies was distributed by the military checkpoints set up by the Moroccan state in Manila. However, these daily necessities only prevented these people from starving. 80% of companies and enterprises are facing bankruptcy protection, and shops and supermarkets are closing one after another. People cannot buy the daily necessities they need, and can only rely on the relief food distributed by the military checkpoints set up by the Moroccan state on the main roads in the city to barely survive. But even if the shops were open at this moment, they couldn't buy anything. With the defeat of the Philippines, the Philippine peso depreciated into waste paper overnight, and a banknote with the largest denomination couldn't even exchange for a roll of toilet paper. In contrast, the US dollar and the RMB became the hard currency in the occupied areas. In addition, cigarettes and sanitary napkins are also quite popular on the black market. $10, or even a few Dove chocolates, or a pack of self-heating military rations, can be exchanged for a girl's first night. A bag of milk powder or a box of cold medicine can buy the dignity of a chaste woman. Even though the military discipline of the starring trade is strict, the superiors basically turn a blind eye to what the soldiers do in their private time. As long as it doesn't delay the guard duty, as long as it's not robbed with a gun, and it's a transaction between you and me, no one will interfere. What's more, from another perspective, this is not doing good things. After occupying Manila, Jiang Chen immediately convened the opposition parties in the Philippines, selected obedient congressmen and politicians, and formed a transitional government in the Philippines before the UN meeting, throwing all administrative affairs in the occupied areas into the hands of the transitional government. The United Nations, led by Western countries, certainly could not recognize the legitimacy of the transitional government. But this was useless. Jiang Chen immediately ordered the newly established transitional government to do two things. The first thing was to permanently abandon the previous government's improper sovereignty claim over the South China Sea, and remove Scarborough Shoal from the jurisdiction of the Western Military Region, and rename it to Angayan Island on the official map, which is the name given by the Chinese side. The second thing was to reduce the army by 40,000, and the army would retain a small number of light weapons and light vehicles, and reorganize it into a military police corps, that is, a military police. Replace the disbanded police agency, to exercise law enforcement power in the occupied area, and maintain the interim constitution formulated by the transitional government. As soon as the news of the renunciation of sovereignty came out, it was immediately protested by the people in the Philippines. In contrast, it was welcomed by the Chinese side. The day after the news was announced, the Philippine transitional government received a $500 million aid from China. At the same time, China also highly affirmed the Philippine transitional government's positive contribution to restoring regional stability. Then, Russia also expressed its recognition of the Philippine transitional government, and urged the transitional government to complete the stabilization of the domestic situation as soon as possible, hold a new election, and restore peace and stability. Before the United Nations held a meeting on the establishment of the Philippine transitional government, Jiang Chen not only took the lead in completing the establishment of the transitional government, but also won over the 2 permanent members of the 5 permanent members to his side. Even if Western countries try to make a fuss through the United Nations and demand the re-establishment of the Philippine transitional government, Jiang Chen will have at least 2 votes against it. As for the protests from the Philippines, to be honest, Jiang Chen doesn't care how these monkeys protest, even if they complain in front of the international media and portray themselves as victims. It can't change the fact that they are the invaders. What's more, those monkeys have never stopped protesting and demonstrating since the day they were defeated. At this moment, the entire Philippines is under the military control of Morocco, and no matter how fierce the protests are, they can't cause any waves. As for the second thing, the establishment of the military police to take over the security of the Philippines is mainly to clean up the mess in the Philippines. Morocco can't keep such a large-scale garrison in the Philippines all the time. Not to mention that the United States will not agree. Morocco's finances can't afford it. These troops have to spend a lot of money to stay in a foreign country for one more second. Starring Trade has begun to withdraw troops one after another, and only retains 2 military bases and a brigade of troops in Manila. The Hilton Hotel near Malacanang Palace has been bought by Jiang Chen from the Hilton Group, which sold its assets in the Philippines at a floor price of $200 million and transformed into the Starring Trade office in the Philippines. In addition to a dozen diplomats, there are also 200 fully armed soldiers stationed here, as well as a special commissioner sent by the Moroccan country. Jiang Chen still has some things to deal with in Manila, so he can stay here temporarily. 2 days ago, he lived in the Malacanang Palace, the presidential palace of the Philippines, but now the Sea Lion Special Forces have returned it to the transitional government. The peacekeeping force has arrived at Leyte Island. At 12 noon today, our people have withdrawn from the suburbs of Tacloban City. Standing on the holographic screen, Ivan reported to him the latest military situation. Very good. The United Nations has finally taken over the mess of Leet Island. Jiang Chen leaned back in his chair, took a sip of the coffee that Aisha had prepared by herself, and smiled. How many people did they come? 1,000 people. Jiang Chen nodded. Considering the population of the survivors in Tacloban City, this number was about what he expected. Ivan's expression was a little hesitant, but he finally made up his mind and asked, "Is it really a good idea to completely entrust Leet to the United Nations? Why not?" Jiang Chen laughed. "Leet is now a mess. If we don't hand it over to the United Nations, we will have to let our people go to help the Philippines repair the power grid despite the radiation. One Manila is enough, and we can't handle more. No, what I mean is, if the investigation is completely handed over to the United Nations, will the Freemasons use their influence in the International Court of Justice to make an unfair ruling on the investigation results?" Jiang Chen shook his head. "If we follow the procedures, from investigation and evidence collection to trial, when do you think the ruling will come out?" At this point, Jiang Chen put the coffee cup back on the table and raised 3 fingers. 3 years. At least 3 years. The more serious the matter, the more complicated the investigation and evidence collection will be. We have already taken the lead in public opinion, and the international community has already had a preconceived notion about this incident. If they intend to tamper with the verdict, they must delay the investigation and evidence collection as long as possible to add more variables. Then Ivan opened his mouth, but was quickly interrupted by Jiang Chen. "Then here comes the question." Jiang Chen smiled at his subordinates, crossed his fingers on the table, and said confidently, "Do they still have that long of a lifespan?" Chapter 838 Kara's visit. The Freemasons have not made any moves yet. The first to make a move is the United States. Although Jiang Chen guessed that the United States would contact him, he never expected that the person who came was the famous John Kerry, the US Secretary of State. The US Secretary of State nominated by former President Obama as Hillary's successor can be said to be quite experienced in diplomatic work. Many American media have rated Kerry as a rare diplomatic star in American history. Because he received high evaluations during his term, he was renominated by the new president after Comrade Obama's term ended. In Jiang Chen's opinion, the Secretary of State's personal visit can only mean one thing. That really scared the United States. Haha, welcome, Mr. Kerry. What wind brings you here? Warm wind blowing from the Pacific Ocean. Nice to meet you, Mr. Jiang Chen. At Manila International Airport, Jiang Chen stood by the runway of the airport and smiled and extended his hand to Mr. Kerry, who was getting off the plane. The latter also shook his hand enthusiastically and expressed his gratitude for his welcome. If you don't know the grudge between the two sides, in the eyes of others, the two people are just like good friends who haven't seen each other for many years, and you can't tell that it's the first time they meet. After a brief greeting, accompanied by the Sea Lion Special Forces, Jiang Chen brought Kerry to the convoy responsible for the pickup work. Looking at the Lincoln Extended Edition sandwiched between the front and rear armored vehicles, Kerry laughed and teased, "If I hadn't been to Manila, I would definitely suspect that I was sent to Baghdad by a drunken captain." Although it was just a joke, it was not without a little irony. Kerry meant to express that Morocco and starring trade have become destroyers of the regional situation. A good country has been turned into the Iraq of Southeast Asia. But when he said this, he obviously selectively forgot that the current situation in Baghdad was caused by the US invasion. "Believe me, it must be much better here than Iraq," Jiang Chen said with a smile. "I hope so." Kerry shrugged and said without comment, "With armored vehicles leading the way, no one came to cause trouble. The reason why the security level was so high was not to guard against protesters who threw rocks and Molotov cocktails, but mainly to prevent the Freemasons from sending assassins or something else." Although this Lincoln car looks plain, every piece of its glass has been replaced with stronger graphene, and every inch of the car body has been replaced with A-shaped steel. Even anti-material rifles can't hurt the people in the car. The two armored vehicles in front and behind act as minesweepers to prevent possible roadside bombs. Jiang Chen's safety is the responsibility of both the Sea Lion Special Forces and the Ghost Agents. Even if Israel's Mossad comes, it will only return in defeat. Sitting in the welcoming car, Carrie did not mention the details of this diplomatic visit. The two talked about basketball and golf along the way, but did not talk about issues related to the international situation. Seeing that he was not going to bring it up, Jiang Chen did not ask. After sending Carrie to the hotel, where he was staying, Jiang Chen then returned to the Hilton Hotel, where he was staying. When he returned to the presidential suite on the top floor, Aisha had already prepared a sumptuous and delicious dinner for him. She took the suit from Jiang Chen at the entrance, hung the suit on the hanger, and reported to him the intelligence collected by the ghost agent. 2 days ago, the US Department of Defense held a secret meeting at the Pentagon. After the meeting, Minister Ashton immediately raised the research and development budget for anti-strategic EMP weapons and high-orbit interception systems. In addition, after the meeting, Hillary went to New York to meet with the Secretary General of the United Nations. According to the analysis of the new National Intelligence Agency, the United States may restrict the use of EMP weapons by formulating a United Nations convention. Jiang Chen nodded, stopped at the entrance for a moment, and then asked Aisha, "What about Europe? Is there any news about Carmen?" "Not yet." Speaking of this, Aisha's expression was a little regretful. The last time Carmen showed up in public was 2 months ago. In mid-June, he could still be seen at the product launch of the Daimler Group, and then he disappeared from the face of the earth. I don't know where he went. Really? It seems that he has been wary of me since June this year. Jiang Chen smiled and was not surprised. Assassination is the lowest level of practice, but it is also one of the most effective means. If all the members of the Freemasons from the 33rd degree and below can be killed, the Freemasons will almost be finished. However, killing these capital tycoons is not much easier than assassinating the US president. At least the media will follow the president's travel, but for capitalists of Carmen's level, even if the media wants to interview them, they can't find them. The richer you are, the more afraid of death you are. Jiang Chen himself quite agrees with this. The Rothschild family's investment in the safety of their clansmen is no less than the money they invested in Winner is. To confirm the location of the top Freemasons, or even to carry out assassinations, the ghost agents have to face opponents at least at the level of Mossad. Technology can bring advantages, but the advantages are not absolute. In order to prevent infiltration by intelligence agencies of other countries, ghost agents choose newcomers who have never had experience in intelligence work, especially young people, when recruiting new members. Although this ensures loyalty, it cannot make up for the lack of experience of these intelligence workers. Do we need to send more people to Europe? Aisha asked somewhat unwillingly. No, it's enough now. Jiang Chen shook his head, and suddenly, as if he remembered something, he spoke again. By the way, have you seen the manor in Bavaria? I checked it, and Carmen is not there. Aisha shook her head. No, Carmen, I want to ask, how is old Rothschild? Jiang Chen asked with a smile. Although he had fallen out with the Rothschild family, Jiang Chen still had a good impression of the old man who lived in seclusion by the lake. Even now, he still remembered what the old man said that night and the greasy roast chicken he invited him to eat. It was not delicious, but it had a different flavor compared to the pastries at the banquet. Aisha was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting Jiang Chen to ask this suddenly. Because she did not attend the banquet with Jiang Chen at that time, Aisha did not have a deep impression of the old man. However, the old man was mentioned in the intelligence collected by the ghost agent. After recalling carefully for a moment, she spoke. He is in good health. I heard that the former head of the family is building a boat by the lake. Is the boat built? Jiang Chen asked. It's already built. Do I need to keep an eye on him? Aisha tilted her head and asked. Haha, no need. This is just my personal curiosity. There is no need to send someone to watch it. Jiang Chen said with a smile. Glancing at the wall clock, he saw that it was getting late, so he reached out and rubbed Aisha's hair, ending the topic of work. It's getting late, let's eat early. Feeling the warmth coming from the big hand on her head, Aisha nodded gently. The food is ready, I'll serve it. Jiang Chen smiled slightly, put his arm around her slender waist, and whispered in her ear. Let's go together. Aisha's pretty face was dyed red like an apple, and she lowered her eyebrows a little shyly. Yeah. Chapter 839 Mad Mechanism. After visiting the Philippines, John Kerry did not rush to negotiate with Jiang Chen, but met with Santos, the president of Moro, and Bautista, the former mayor of Quezon City and the current president of the transitional government. However, according to the informants arranged by the ghost agent on both sides, Kerry did not achieve any ideal results in the talks, especially the current president of the transitional government, although Kerry issued many tempting checks, promising to help the Philippines solve the Mindanao issue, help the Philippines rebuild the economy, and so on. Bautista remained unmoved and clung to the 5-starring trade. Just kidding. Not to mention that their troops are still in Manila and have not withdrawn. Even if they have withdrawn, when have you Americans cashed the checks you issued? Bautista knows very well that the Philippines issue is not well received in the White House or Congress. The United States needs the Philippines to check the rising China, so it will issue these checks. However, the economy of the Philippines is mainly controlled by Jewish financial groups, and the WASP financial groups that have an advantage in Congress do not intend to cash the check issued by the White House for political needs. At this time, if the transitional government continues the previous diplomatic strategy of clinging to Japan and the United States, it would be a fool's errand. Finally, on the third day of Kerry's visit to Manila, he had no progress and had to go to the Hilton Hotel, whose sign had been changed to Starring Trade Manila office. Led by the Starring Trade soldiers, they came to the reception room and met Jiang Chen. Leaning on the sofa, Jiang Chen smiled at Mr. Kerry, who walked into the room, and teased him. "Long time no see, Mr. Kerry, how have you been recently?" Jiang Chen's teasing made Kerry a little embarrassed because he had made almost no progress in the past 3 days. Not bad, haha. But he was an old hand after all, so he didn't show any embarrassment on his face. He smiled and sat down opposite Jiang Chen, cast his eyes on the bottle of red wine on the table, and changed the subject in a relaxed tone. "Romanican tea, wow, I heard that its price is comparable to its weight in gold. I've only seen it in Hollywood blockbusters. Produced in 1945, $600,000 US. Jiang Chen signaled the waiter next to him to open the cork, poured a glass for each of them, then looked at Kerry and smiled. "When Hilton sold this hotel to me, he also sold all the fine wines in the cellar to me. It just so happens that China has a tradition of welcoming distinguished guests with good wine. Today, when a distinguished guest visits, how can we do without fine wine? I'm afraid it's not appropriate for me to drink such expensive wine. It doesn't matter, this is not Washington." Jiang Chen picked up the wine glass and clinked it with him from a distance. "So, you don't have to bring the Washington set here, just say whatever you want. Then I'll get straight to the point." Kerry finally didn't touch the glass of wine, restrained the smile on his face, and put on a serious attitude. "What do you want? What do you want?" Hearing Kerry's question, Jiang Chen suddenly smiled. "Do you mean that I started this war? Mr. Jiang Chen, since you want me to speak directly, then let's not beat around the bush." Kerry shook his head. "You and I both know that I'm not referring to this war." "What do you mean?" Jiang Chen narrowed his eyes slightly. "What exactly do you want to remove the missiles deployed under the Pacific Ocean?" Kerry stared into Jiang Chen's eyes. The atmosphere in the reception room gradually cooled down. Jiang Chen put down the wine glass in his hand and spread his hands. "This is not a problem at all, because we absolutely cannot remove those missiles. Your missiles seriously threaten the stability of the regional and even global situation. If you do not intend to trigger a new round of arms race, I advise you to consider this issue seriously and responsibly. Instead of then, in order to maintain love and peace, why don't you give up all nuclear weapons? I also ask you to seriously and responsibly consider my proposal." Jiang Chen interrupted Kerry and said with a smile. Jiang Chen's words made Kerry pause slightly. He did not expect Jiang Chen to throw out such a rogue word to block him. After pondering for a while, Kerry sorted out his thoughts in his mind and slowed down his tone. The unilateral abandonment of nuclear weapons by the United States will not bring positive impact to the global situation. Instead, it will accelerate the deterioration of the global situation. In addition, what we are discussing now is the issue of intercontinental missiles deployed by your side in the Pacific Ocean. Please don't talk about these irrelevant things." "Really?" In my opinion, the two are completely the same, Jiang Chen said with a smile. If you are unwilling to give up nuclear weapons, then what reason do you have to ask us to give up EMP? With all due respect, EMP is much safer and more environmentally friendly than nuclear weapons. But in terms of danger, the two are equal. Kerry said word by word. If you refuse, then we will deploy B-2 bombers at the Guam military base. However, to Kerry's surprise, Jiang Chen did not react to his threat. The silence between the two lasted for a long time. After waiting for a while, Jiang Chen saw that Kerry did not speak, raised his eyebrows, and broke the silence. Then what? Then? Jiang Chen's words stunned Kerry. I've already told you that, if you don't withdraw the missiles, we will put strategic bombing at your doorstep. What else do you want? Of course, you can't say it so bluntly. After coughing lightly, Kerry continued. It seems that Mr. Jiang didn't understand what I meant, so I'll explain it in detail. The B-2 bomber is a stealth strategic bomber that the US military is proud of. I can't say much about this bomber. Everything that can be revealed can be found on the internet. I just want to emphasize that the B-2 bomber has nuclear strike capability. You should understand what I mean. Jiang Chen smiled. I thought you were going to say something. If a few B-2 bombers can make you feel safe, then you can just throw it at our doorstep. You're not afraid? Kerry couldn't help but said. Why should I be afraid? Jiang Chen sat up straight and leaned forward slightly. It doesn't matter where your nuclear bombs are placed to us. I believe you are definitely familiar with the MAD mechanism. After all, this is a theory proposed by you Americans. The MAD mechanism, namely mutually assured destruction, was proposed by US Secretary of Defense McNamara during the Cold War. Although it has been denied by the official, it has to be admitted that this mechanism has always been the idea of using nuclear weapons during the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, and it is even still used today. If one day in the future, the United States uses nuclear weapons against New Zealand, then the EMP of starring trade will undoubtedly return the United States to the Stone Age overnight. In this case, where are the nuclear weapons of the United States, and how much impact can it have on Jiang Chen? Seeing Kerry's nervous look, Jiang Chen changed to a slightly more relaxed tone. Peaceful development and friendly exchanges are the consistent diplomatic positions of New Zealand. As the guardian of New Zealand, starring trade promises that EMP weapons will only be used for defense and counterattacks, and will never be used for aggressive purposes. At this point, Jiang Chen looked at Kerry and continued. If you insist on asking us to give up EMP weapons, then please set an example and destroy all nuclear weapons. Otherwise. At this point, Jiang Chen laughed and stopped talking. Although he did not finish the last sentence, the meaning he showed at this moment was already very clear. Otherwise, then go back to Washington with your double standards. Chapter 840 Post-War Settlement. In the Manila court, Aquino IV stood in the dock with a pale face, staring blankly at the pattern on the floor tiles. At this moment, his face was several times more haggard than when he had just been injected with truth serum. His arm, handcuffed, was as thin as a reed stick. In order to prevent the UN observers from misunderstanding that he was treated inhumanely in prison, the prison guards, at the instruction of Jiang Chen, forced him to drink 2 bottles of high-calorie nutritional mixture before the trial. The prosecutor's indignant speech drew applause from the jury. However, all this sounded as faint as the buzzing of a fly in his ears. He didn't raise his head until the judge announced the verdict. The defendant Aquino has been sentenced to life imprisonment for 15 crimes, including dereliction of duty, crimes against humanity, crimes against public safety, and war crimes. The sentence will be executed immediately after the trial. During the sentence, he will not be granted parole or medical parole. The judge's words were like a heavy hammer, ringing the death knell in Aquino's heart. At this moment, his heart was full of regret. He regretted being deceived by Rothschild's words, regretted starting this stupid war, and even more regretted agreeing to Moritz's crazy plan. But there was no point in regretting it. Because of this difference in thought, he had been nailed to the pillar of shame in history. He only hated why the judge's verdict was not death penalty. Go. The gendarmerie said in a cold tone, with his hand on Aquino's shoulder. Looking at the young gendarmerie in the hateful eyes he looked at himself, Aquino suddenly wanted to laugh for some reason. But he didn't laugh in the end, because the military policeman pushed him to leave the court without saying anything, and even pushed and shoved him out of the court. Not only did he lead the Philippines to the abyss of defeat, but he also ordered the use of nuclear weapons against his own people. He has become a sinner for the entire country, especially these young people who once supported him. They even hate him more than the Moros who were showing off their power in Manila. Next, the defendant Stark. The last thing he heard was the judge's emotionless voice. After Aquino was taken away, the trial continued. As major war criminals, Aquino and Marshall Stark were both sentenced to life imprisonment and imprisoned in the notorious Quezon City prison in Manila. In fact, at the beginning, the court was prepared to sentence the two to death. However, considering the pressure from the international community and the abolition of the death penalty in the Philippine criminal law, the judges of the Supreme Court changed the final sentence of the two to life imprisonment, after referring to Jiang Chen's suggestion. Death is a relief for them. Sometimes, being alive is a crueler punishment. The rest of the war criminals were sentenced to fixed-term imprisonment of more than 20 years and less than 50 years. Although the time limit was added to the sentencing, considering the age of these war criminals, it was no different from life imprisonment. Now that the war is over, and the mess has been cleaned up, it is time to start the real liquidation. In late August, the Philippine transitional government checked the accounts of the former regime's treasury expenditures and froze the assets of several investment banks in the Philippines, including Rothschild Bank, that were suspected of providing war loans to the war criminal Aquino IV, on the grounds of indirectly supporting the war of aggression. This move immediately aroused strong dissatisfaction from the European Union and other countries. However, at this moment, even if they were dissatisfied, it would be useless. The only thing they could do was to revoke the $20 million in aid originally planned to provide to the Philippine transitional government. However, the assets that were nationalized by the Philippine transitional government were more than tens of millions, at least 1 or 200 billion. The peso has become waste paper, and the Philippines' finances are now quite tight. These properties that originally belonged to Rothschild Bank, mines of BHP Mining Group, plantations and sugar factories of Louis Dreyfus Company were all sold off by the cash-strapped transitional government. Most of these assets, that were sold at low prices, eventually fell into Jiang Chen's pocket. At the floor price of $6 billion, the 20 billion assets invested by the Jewish consortium in the Philippines were almost completely plundered. As the behind-the-scenes controller of the transitional government, Jiang Chen can be said to have made a fortune. This money was paid from his personal account, so it was not counted as the assets of the future group. However, in order to facilitate the management of these assets, he poured these trophies to his left hand, future bank at a symbolic price of $1, and the future group will be entrusted with these industries. As the saying goes, too many fleas will not itch, and too much debt will not worry. Jiang Chen didn't care about offending the Freemasons anymore, since he had already offended them. He still cared about the past friendship, after they had already torn their faces apart. That was a asterisk asterisk asterisk. In this way, the future group immediately recovered the tens of billions of dollars lost by withdrawing from the EU market from the Freemasons. Not only did the tens of billions of dollars of investment go down the drain, but all the assets in the Philippines were sold off. It is no exaggeration to say that in just this month, the direct losses of the Rothschild family reached 20 billion, and the combined losses of several Jewish consortiums that were inextricably linked to the Freemasons exceeded $35 billion. Logically speaking, after suffering such heavy losses, these Jewish consortiums would never give up. However, at this moment, even if they wanted to retaliate against the future group, they couldn't spare their hands. Just as the whole world focused its attention on Southeast Asia, Ukraine, far away on the other side of the earth, was quietly brewing a dramatic change. On the evening of August 20th, the civilian armed forces stationed in Donetsk launched a new round of offensives against the Ukrainian government forces west of the ceasefire line, destroying the Ukrainian artillery positions that had been harassing the western defense line of Donetsk with mortars and howitzers. Although the two sides reached a ceasefire under the mediation of the United Nations, a real ceasefire has never been achieved. Although no one has crossed the ceasefire line, sporadic mutual shelling has always been a daily greeting between the two sides. The shells that fell east of the ceasefire line were produced in the EU military factory, and the shells that fell west were produced in Moscow. Now, the resentment accumulated over the years has finally been ignited. The Kremlin knows very well that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Russia to recover eastern Ukraine. If it does not take action at this time, it will not be so easy to wait for such a good opportunity. With the secret support of Russia, the civilian armed forces in eastern Ukraine drove the government forces from the ceasefire line to the other side of the Dnieper River. After recovering all the territories, Donetsk and Luhansk held referendums one after another, preparing to copy the Crimea model and join the Russian Federation. NATO's energy was tied up in the Turkish civil war and the Southeast Asian nuclear crisis. The outbreak of the Ukrainian crisis at this time undoubtedly caught the EU and the United States off guard. With the fire at their doorstep, the Freemasons had to temporarily shift their strategic focus to their more core interests in Europe. As for how much bargaining chips and weapons can add to Russia's response to NATO, this was beyond Jiang Chen's expectations. The game between big countries and the game between big countries and small countries are two completely different games in terms of gamma play. At this moment, Jiang Chen was busy digesting the spoils left by the Jews and had no time to care about such distant issues. The second round of the battle with the Freemasons ended with the future group's complete victory. Chapter 841 Economic Vassal State. Summer is coming to an end, and the temperature in Luzon is much better than before. War criminals have been imprisoned, post-war settlements have been completed, and the transitional government has smoothly taken over national affairs, and the tense atmosphere has subsided a lot. At present, the Moro army still occupies Manila, and the scars of war can still be seen in the streets and alleys. The war refugees who used to fill the streets and alleys and line up at the military checkpoints to receive relief food are much less than before. Mindanao is developing light industry, and many food processing plants, paper mills, and garment factories have sprung up like mushrooms after rain. People who can't find jobs in Manila began to migrate south and take a boat from Quezon City to Mindanao to try their luck. Although the war between the two countries has just ended, the years of unification have allowed the people of the two countries to have a few blood ties. The transitional government has a good relationship with Santos. In order to ease the tense employment pressure in the country, the two sides signed a special visa-free agreement to facilitate the unemployed in Manila to go to Mindanao to work. The industry of Moro is in its early stages, and it just needs these technical talents from Manila. In early September, with the help of the State Grid Corporation of China, the power grid in downtown Manila and the industrial zone was finally restored. As for when Manila's power grid can be restored to the level before the war, it is estimated that it will have to wait until this time next year. At this moment, in the suburbs of Manila, large and small plantations have resumed production. In the whole of Manila, and even in the entire southern part of Luzon, the only industry that suffered the least loss was the planting industry with no technical content. Although the orders from China were greatly reduced, fortunately, the relationship between Singapore and the Philippines eased after the transitional government came to power. Singapore lowered the tariffs on a total of 21 commodities such as bananas, mangoes, coconuts, and iron ore from the Philippines. The orders from Singapore relieved the pressure on these plantations, allowing those unsellable fruits to be disposed of at a price acceptable to fruit farmers. Years of border friction and the participation of the starring trade in the Morpheus War have made the Filipinos generally hostile to the new country, but these fruit farmers who have benefited from it are undoubtedly grateful to the new country merchants who saved them from the water and fire. Among them, the Future People group is the leader, and the Future People biology has almost eaten up all of their unsellable inventory. At this moment, these refugees who came from the city to work in the countryside are helping to move boxes of fruit onto wooden carts and leading mules and horses to carry these goods to the dock. The plantation truck broke down, and the new truck has not arrived yet. Before that, they can only make do with this primitive method. Some of these people who are carrying goods are wearing leather shoes, and some are even wearing trousers. They are obviously not farmers, but they do harder work than farmers. Only they themselves know the bitterness. In the whole of Manila, there are only a few companies that have not closed down, and there are few decent jobs to provide them. Although several large industrial parks have resumed power supply, there is not a single factory in operation at the moment. It's not just the power grid that was paralyzed by EMP, but also the production lines and industrial machine tools. Without production tools, it's impossible to plug yourself into a socket with just a few kilowatt hours of electricity, right? Speaking of the negative impact of EMP on the Philippine industry, we have to mention the pure electric vehicle companies that Jiang Chen acquired in Europe earlier. Previously, due to a series of sanctions from the European Union, many pure electric vehicle companies such as Lucas had declined from a market value of billions of dollars to the brink of bankruptcy. At that time, Jiang Chen gave an order to let Lucas and others move the company from Europe to Asia, settle in the Singapore-Malaysia special zone, abandon Europe, and focus on the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean markets. When executing the order, Lucas was undoubtedly desperate. However, less than 2 months later, the situation immediately took a turn for the better. It was not because of anything else, but because of the EMP detonated by starring trade over Manila. Within the range of the EMP strike, all civilian vehicles in Manila became scrap metal, and motor vehicles across the Philippines became nervous because of this. The paralysis of the transportation system is even more troublesome than the paralysis of the production system. Affected by this, the demand for cars in the Philippines has increased dramatically, and the performance of Lucas Automobile Company has almost soared. Especially for pickup trucks and small and medium-sized trucks, many companies have to borrow money from banks to buy them in order to restore paralyzed logistics. And in this environment, with its reliability and relatively low price, Lucas brand has conquered half of the market for related types of cars in the Philippines. In order to fill this large market gap, Lucas has continuously ordered the company's assembly plants to expand production lines. At the same time, it has joined forces with Future Heavy Industry and several electric vehicle manufacturers to invest in the construction of solar electric vehicle charging stations in major cities such as Manila in the Philippines to further consolidate its current market position. Maintaining a long-term vassal relationship does not rely on a mere contract, but on economic dependence. What Jiang Chen has to do is to make every piece of iron, or knocked out of the mine by the Filipinos, go through the sorting and smelting of steel mills in Singapore or indirectly related to Singapore, and finally make it into finished steel. Every grain of rice produced by the Filipinos has to pass through the food processing plant of the Future Group before returning to their own dining tables. By then, even if the transitional government is dissolved and the new president elected in the Philippine election is not Bautista, they will have to continue to be this vassal for the sake of employment rate and GDP data. Having stayed in Manila for a month, Jiang Chen took a plane back to Coral Island after finishing the things at hand. After walking out of the airport and looking at the bustling crowds on the streets, Jiang Chen finally had some feeling of returning to civilized society. When I was in Manila, it was quite inconvenient in various senses. Every time I went out, there were armored vehicles sandwiched in front and behind, and there were at least 2 people standing in front of the car door. Fortunately, he is back now, and this kind of life should end. Unlike the dilapidated Manila, the developing Singapore can be said to be thriving. The war between neighboring countries did not affect the lives of the people of Singapore. On the contrary, due to the depreciation of the peso, the prices of goods in Coral Island have dropped a lot compared to before, especially fruits and food. In mid-September, the first batch of rice, cabbage and carrots produced from the seabed finally landed in the farmers' markets of Coral Island and Penglay City. Since there is no need to worry about pests, these agricultural products can be said to have no pesticides at all, and they are truly pure and pollution-free. Due to the rich carbon dioxide environment of the ocean and factors such as constant temperature, these crops produced from the seabed are often better and more delicious than those grown on land. Look at the rice grains. The grains are full like pearls, and the steamed rice is soft, glutinous, and fresh. It is addictive to eat. There are also cabbages, which are juicy and fresh, and the stems are all like mutton fat jade. They look pleasing, taste delicious, and are nutritious. Such agricultural products, no matter which country's market they are placed in, will definitely be competitive. And the most important thing is that it is cheap. because they are vegetables produced in the country. Not only do they not have to pay tariffs, but even corporate income tax enjoys policy subsidies. In addition, because there is no need to use pesticides, the three-dimensional planting of vegetables below and fish above even saves fertilizers, and highly mechanized farming does not require too much manpower. If the one-time investment in building a planting base is not taken into account, the cost of these rice grown on the seabed is at least 30% lower than that imported from Thailand and Australia. I had a small outburst. I can finally shamelessly ask for a vote from Morningstar and the Monthly Ticket Brothers. Please hand over the votes. Thank you very much. Chapter 842 The Trust Model Information. Matthew Gree, former CEO of Sunrise in Australia, is now the CEO of Xinheinong, a subsidiary of Future Group. Some time ago, Future Group's acquisition of Sunrise's assets was blocked by Cargill of the United States, and the wealthy Future Group immediately launched an offensive against Sunrise. Since the conditions offered by Future Group were quite generous, and Matthew himself was quite optimistic about the prospects of seabed planting, he accepted the olive branch thrown by Future Group without much hesitation. After taking office, he did play his professional ability and managed Xinheinong, a new company that was established less than half a year, in an orderly manner. After Jiang Chen returned to Koro Island from Manila, the first thing he did was to find the CEO of Xinheinong. Although agriculture accounts for a very low proportion of the income of the subsidiaries of Future Group, he has always regarded agriculture as a key project. Agriculture is directly related to the cost of living of the people of new country, and indirectly related to the stability of the political situation in new country under his control. At this moment, in the office of Future Building, Jiang Chen was listening to Matthew Gree's report on Xinheinong's recent work. Xinheinong's 400,000 mu of seabed planting area has been fully developed, with a total revenue of $43.7 million in the first quarter, accounting for 56% and 37% of the market share of Penglai City and Xingguo farmers markets. According to the analysis of the Market Research Department, there is a large gap in the market for cash crops such as soybeans, tea, coffee, and cocoa beans in Xingguo. In the next quarter, we plan to open up the planting of such crops and add 500,000 mu of arable land. After listening to Matthew Gree's report, Jiang Chen nodded and said, adding 500,000 mu of arable land is no problem, but I have a different opinion on using it to plant cash crops. Although the plan was questioned by the chairman, Matthew Gree did not show discouragement. When he was the CEO of Sunrise, the most important thing he did every day was to persuade the board of directors who did not understand the market situation to nod. The shareholder structure of Future Group is single, and Jiang Chen alone represents the entire board of directors. It is much easier to persuade one person than to persuade a group of people, so he patiently explained to him. Planting cash crops absolutely meets the current market demand of Singapore. And the company's technical department has confirmed that planting cash crops in the seabed planting base is technically feasible. If you still have doubts about this plan, I can provide you with a global and domestic market research report and industry analysis document tomorrow. No, you misunderstood. Jiang Chen smiled and shook his head. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with planting cash crops, but cash crops don't need to be planted on the seabed. I own 15 million acres of plantations in the Philippines, and I have allocated them to Xinheinong in the form of custodial assets through Future Bank. The formalities will be completed in about 3 days. 15 million acres. Jiang Chen's understated words set off a storm in Matthew's heart. Others may not understand, but as the former CEO of an Australian rice monopoly company, he knows the cultivated land area of Southeast Asian countries very well. 15 million acres of plantations, equivalent to 10,000 square kilometers, is almost equivalent to 1/10 of the total cultivated land area of the Philippines. When did Future Group have such a close relationship with the Philippines? Will the Philippines allow foreign companies to control such a huge amount of arable land resources? After a while, Matthew came back to his senses and restrained the surprised expression on his face. Sorry, I lost my composure. It's okay. Jiang Chen smiled indifferently and handed the plan on the table back to him. I understand your surprise, but this is the fact. Xinhainong submarine planting area is still mainly food crops, and we can plant cash crops in overseas plantations. We have already negotiated with the Moro government for a light industrial park mainly for food processing. Future Human Biology and Xinjiang Food are currently building a food processing plant in Mindanao. At this point, Jiang Chen paused for a moment, looked at Matthew with a smile, and drew a triangle on the desk with his fingers. The Philippines produces the raw materials, Moro processes the raw materials, and finally serves the new country market, and sells our products to the global market from Penglay City. I hope that the cash crops planted by Xinhainong are not just soybeans, tea, coffee, and cocoa beans, but also coconuts, rubber, and all other crops that the future group can use. You must get involved. Give priority to meeting the needs of the group, and export the excess. Trust model. After listening to Jiang Chen's words, Matthew swallowed his saliva and squeezed out a very retro word. The reason why it is retro is that in modern society, this kind of profiteering monopoly method is almost extinct. Even the powerful consortiums such as Morgan and Goldman Sachs dare not show their monopoly on a certain industry so blatantly. From the production of raw materials, to processing, to sales, and finally the distribution of profits, all are completed by a group. The highly integrated management structure will make each production link a screw in the entire industrial chain, and controlled by the same company. The consequence is that the production cost of this company will be very low. So low that other companies can't compete with it at all. To give a very simple example, the cost of Coca-Cola to produce a bottle of Coke is only about 7 to 8 cents. But if all the raw materials and aluminum used in cans are produced by Coca-Cola's subsidiaries, then this cost is likely to be directly reduced by half. Of course, no one knows how much the cost can be reduced, and Coca-Cola will never do so. Rockefeller first established the trust model, monopolizing 95% of the United States refining capacity, 90% of the oil transportation capacity, and 25% of the crude oil production. The final result was that it was poisoned by Roosevelt and turned into 34 small mobiles. That's right. Jiang Chen nodded and smiled bluntly. You can understand the nature of the future group as a new type of trust model. But if you want to say the difference, we still have it. From the beginning, the future group has mastered the violent organ of the army, and by controlling the sovereign state, it has forcibly opened up a living space for the monopoly group. If it were to change places, in China or any other country in the United States, the future group would not be able to obtain soil for development, and would sooner or later touch the bottom line of the country's tolerance for monopoly. So far, the two decisions that Jiang Chen was most satisfied with were the choice of Sun Jiao as CEO without caring about personal grudges, and the second was to move the future group to the current new country early. I will do it. I have to take the plan back and revise it. Tomorrow, no, the day after tomorrow, the new one will be delivered to your desk. Tomorrow I have to call a meeting with the senior executives of Xinhainong. If we own 15 million acres of plantations in the Philippines, everything will have to be replanned. Matthew shrugged helplessly, but the excited smile on the corner of his mouth could not be hidden. Then go quickly, don't waste time here, Jiang Chen said with a smile. After Matthew left, Jiang Chen leaned back in his chair, called the office secretary, and asked her to make him a cup of coffee, and then took advantage of this moment of free time to close his eyes and think about the next development direction of the group. Gently placing the coffee cup on Jiang Chen's desk, the female secretary secretly glanced at the chairman who was resting with his eyes closed. Her daily job was to serve tea and water, and occasionally help other secretaries organize documents, issue letters of introduction and other minor tasks. Logically, due to the nature of her job, she should have many opportunities to contact Jiang Chen. However, the fact is just the opposite, because the chairman often skips work, and sometimes he is away for a month or two on business trips. To be honest, she occasionally fantasizes about something happening with Jiang Chen. But so far, Jiang Chen has not shown any intention in that regard. She quietly put the documents on Jiang Chen's desk in order, and quietly left the office, closing the door. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel. Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 843, Mental Bridging Technology Breakthrough. The future development direction of the group is a rather broad proposition. In order to fight against the threat from 20.5 light years away, the focus of the future development of the Future Man group must be the universe. Even if the Earth civilization is destined to use bows and arrows and spears to fight against the foreign guns and cannons of the aliens, he has to sharpen the bows and spears. As for the threat from within the human race, maybe it would be better to release some news at the right time. I just don't know if it will have a counter effect. Just when Jiang Chen was about to fall asleep thinking about it, Jane's holographic image appeared beside Jiang Chen's hand and woke him up with a calm tone. "Mr. Chairman, Dr. Amos wants to see you." Jiang Chen rubbed his sleepy eyes, sat up from the chair, yawned and said, "Amos, what's the matter?" According to him, there seems to be a breakthrough in the mental bridge technology. Jiang Chen stood up from the chair suddenly. Spiritual bridge technology. Is it the technology that connects the circuit board through brain waves and transplants the soul into the machine? Perhaps because she didn't understand the word soul deeply enough, Jiang spent a second analyzing Jiang Chen's words and gave a positive answer. "Yes. Tell him to wait for me. I'll go now." After leaving this sentence, Jiang Chen left the office with a smile on his face, walked straight to the elevator, and pressed the button for the basement floor. As the first truly black technology independently developed in the world, he had to witness its birth in person. Amos is indeed a genius. Even Lin Ling, who has always been venomous, sincerely admitted this, and evaluated him as a genius who stood on the shoulders of giants, but saw the scenery that giants could not see. Based on the neural access, it was derived and amplified by wearing a brainwave collection device so that the robot's body can be remotely connected, just like a soul possessed, and the robot's hands and feet can be moved, like one's own hands. At this moment, Jiang Chen was standing in Dr. Amos's laboratory, looking at himself sitting on a chair wearing a helmet. Not through a mirror, but through the robot's electronic eyes. "How does it feel?" Amos looked at Jiang Chen with enthusiasm, and Jiang Chen couldn't help but get goosebumps all over his body. If robots have goosebumps, overall, it's not bad. Looking at his metal hands, Jiang Chen moved his arms and fingers, and then moved his legs with interest. It was almost the same as moving his own body, although there was still a big difference from the human body. In terms of flexibility alone, this mechanical body was not much worse than human limbs. The only flaw was that when staying in the robot's body, the whole person felt empty, as if something was missing. Oh, and because there was no such thing as touch, Jiang Chen found during the test that this kind of robot had poor control over strength. For example, if you stretch out your hand to hold a cup, because you can't feel how much strength you are using, if you are not sure, you will crush the cup. Thinking that it was just a light jump, you didn't pay attention and hit the ceiling directly. Later, under the guidance of Dr. Amos, Jiang Chen set the output power limit of each joint, which avoided such mistakes. However, if the parameters of each action need to be set in advance, it will be troublesome. It seems that the driver of this mechanical substitute must undergo a long period of training before he can skillfully use this mechanical body. Then, under the instruction of Dr. Amos, Jiang Chen completed a series of relatively complex actions such as running, weightlifting, boxing, and shooting in a large number of experimental equipment. While Dr. Amos was happily collecting experimental data, Jiang Chen couldn't help but fall into deep thought. For the application prospects of this mechanical substitute, his first thought is outer space construction. No need for a spacesuit on board. Directly through the mental bridge technology, remotely control the robot to enter space and complete dangerous and complex work. Although the cost of the robot is many times higher than that of the spacesuit, from the perspective of safety and work efficiency, the cost effectiveness of using this robot in outer space is still quite high. The relative speed of objects moving in the universe is unimaginably high. Even if a piece of meteorite fragment the size of a sesame seed hits the spacesuit at a relative speed of hundreds of Mach, the accident caused is quite tragic. However, because human space activities are not very frequent nowadays, this problem has not been exposed. The solution for the end of the world is to improve the strength of the spacesuit so that ordinary meteorite fragments will not feel much when they hit the body. After all, the probability of encountering meteorite fragments with a relative speed of several hundred Mach is not much higher than winning the lottery. If you are still hit by it, you can blame yourself for your low idea. However, it is undeniable that using mental bridging technology, through remote connection, robots controlled by the human brain, to replace people to perform dangerous tasks that are not convenient for AI to complete in outer space is indeed a highly feasible option. Another point is the supply problem. Before the space elevator is completed, the cost of sending an astronaut to the sky is not small at all. A person has to eat, drink, defecate and urinate in the sky, and cannot live in a zero-gravity environment for too long, and has to change shifts every 3 months. Therefore, the more people stay in outer space, the more transportation resources of the starring trade will be occupied. You know, now that the space elevator has not been built, these people rely on rockets and landing capsules to go back and forth. Affected by this, the number of astronauts building space elevators in outer space is very limited. Although there is assistance from intelligent engineering equipment, many tasks still require people to do them, and the progress of the project has been very slow. But if this thing can be used for construction in outer space, the situation will be completely different. These robots can stay in outer space as long as they want. They only need to be equipped with a solar charger, and they can even save on the supply of daily necessities. Taking off his helmet, Jiang Chen cast his eyes on Amos, who was processing data, and asked immediately, "How long will it take to be a finished product?" This one can be considered a finished product, although it is only the first generation. Amos lifted the robot, put it back on the fixed frame next to the laboratory and locked it, then smiled and patted its head. It can work continuously for up to 24 hours. Although there are many defects, it should be no problem to use it. What is the cost of this machine? Speaking of the cost, Amos scratched his messy hair embarrassedly. Ahem. After all, it is the first generation machine, and it is purely handmade. Well, if you don't consider the research and development cost, it is about $5 million. Jiang Chen silently calculated in his mind. It is definitely not possible to throw the naked machine directly into space. In order to adapt to the specific working environment, it needs to be specially modified. So, it would only cost $10 to $20 million to build a mind bridge robot that can work in space. There's a way. Having made up his mind, Jiang Chen spoke immediately. Design a machine that can be used in space. What's the name of this machine? X1 robot. Amos added. Well, I hope you can design an X1 robot that can be used in space. Is there a way to do it? Jiang Chen looked at Amos and said seriously. Theoretically, it's not difficult, but what about communication in space? Amos asked. Hearing this question, Jiang Chen laughed. Haha, my friend, you forgot that we have quantum satellites. Amos slapped his head and suddenly realized it. I almost forgot. How long have you not been out of the house? You should be able to go to an internet cafe. Jiang Chen couldn't help but complain. It's been a while, haha. Amos smiled shyly and said shyly, online. The information in the group's database is richer than that of the German National Library. There is no need to go online. He is the kind of person who will completely fall into a state of ecstasy once he touches the experimental equipment. But it is precisely because of his dedicated scientific research spirit that he finally saw the scenery that the giants cannot see. Chapter 844, Turbulent Crude Oil. On September 21st, 1,000 Marines of the starring trade embarked from the port of Manila, ending the 2-month military occupation. From now on, the security of Manila will be the responsibility of the military police and the Army of the Republic of Moro, and the starring trade's garrison in the Philippines will be reduced by half again, retaining only half of the brigade. On the one hand, this is in response to the United Nations Peace Initiative, and on the other hand, it is to free up hands. After boarding the transport ship, these soldiers did not return to Coro Island, but met up with another large transport ship, and under the escort of the Guardian-class frigate, crossed the Indian Ocean and set foot on the island of Madagascar at the southern tip of Africa. Last week, Madagascar's opposition leader Sangweni was successfully elected president, revoked all the privileges of Arrowhead Company in the country, and revoked their business license on 17 charges including tax evasion, murder, and bribery. However, it is obviously impossible for the Freemasons to honestly hand over the power they have operated in Madagascar for more than a decade. On the first day of Sangwena's swearing-in, more than a dozen Arrowhead Company special forces lurking in the capital Antananarivo ambushed Sangwena's convoy. The president, who had been in office for only 24 hours, died tragically under the random gunfire of Arrowhead Company. Madagascar was in an uproar. Arrowhead Company simply took advantage of the situation and launched the former president Rajoelina, claiming that the Liberal Party colluded with foreign forces and attempted to subvert the stability of Madagascar. The general election was invalid and a new election must be held. However, Rajoelina had no intention of re-election. With the support rate in the southern constituency, he formed a presidential guard that was absolutely loyal to him with the help of the Freemasons, and hired Arrowhead Company to directly take the path of armed coup. Anyway, for these uncivilized small African countries, coups are much more frequent than general elections. The president died, and the Liberal Party was in chaos. Fortunately, Vice President Bernard acted decisively and took over the presidency at the first time, took control of Madagascar's army, and vowed to resist to the end. There are only 21,600 regular troops, with no more than 15 tanks in total, and not enough armored vehicles to form a mechanized brigade. With such a backward army, it is obviously unrealistic to want to confront Lajona, which is supported by the Freemasons. Urge the army to hold the defense line from Antsirabe and block the rebels 120 kilometers before the capital. On the other hand, Bernard immediately contacted Jiang Chen, the behind-the-scenes supporter of the Liberal Party, and asked for help from Starring Trade, which had just repelled the Freemasons in Manila. Starring Trade certainly accepted the request for help from its allies. A mechanized brigade set sail on a transport ship, landed at the northern port of Madagascar, and went directly to the front line to engage in a firefight with the rebels. The so-called Presidential Guard and the Madagascar Army have become decorations. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that the real winner of this war depends on who wins and who loses between Arrowhead Company and Starring Trade. Therefore, this war has also been dubbed as a proxy war and a mercenary war by many people. The longer this war drags on, the more advantageous it will be for Jiang Chen. The main forces dispatched by Starring Trade were foreign troops, individual drones, and armored vehicles and tanks purchased from Russia. The Jag Tiger II and Aurora 20 were not dispatched. Only by consuming Madagascar's national strength as much as possible can it be made obedient after the war, and not have the crooked idea of establishing its own business. Although it is a bit sorry for the allies, they can only make sacrifices for the benefit of the new country. Just as Starring Trade and the Freemasons were fighting fiercely on the island of Madagascar, a financial tsunami was quietly brewing. The situation in the Middle East continued to deteriorate. From the years in Iraq to the civil war in Turkey, those who are interested can clearly see that this piece of land surrounded by Babylonian civilization has fallen into endless war. This war around black gold is also filled with gunpowder smoke in the international crude oil market. Since hitting the bottom at the beginning of the year, the price of a barrel of crude oil has continued to rise. As we all know, the US economy has long relied on the two pillars of oil and the US dollar. According to the International Monetary Fund, every $5 increase in oil prices will reduce the global economic growth rate by about 0.3 percentage points, while the US economic growth rate may drop by about 0.4 percentage points. It can be said that the US dollar and oil are negatively correlated. It is for this reason that the United States has been deliberately promoting the devaluation of oil. As early as 2014, the shale gas revolution doubled the oil production in Texas in 3 years. Many people subjectively believe that all oil comes from the Middle East, but ignore the fact that the UAE's national production is less than that of Texas in the United States. However, even so, the reduction in Middle Eastern oil production due to the war is still a heavy blow to international oil prices. On September 23, Xinhuan Trade and Arrow Company exchanged fire in the northern mountainous area of Antsirabe, Madagascar. The US dollar has been falling for 3 consecutive days due to fluctuations in the international crude oil market. Wall Street traders predict that the probability of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates in September will reach 47%. At the same time, a report from Future People Bank was also placed on Jiang Chen's desk. Due to the rising expectations of the Fed's interest rate hike, the US dollar rose slightly, stopping its downward trend. However, the international crude oil market has not shown any signs of stabilization. The interest rate hike at this time has already laid the hidden dangers of economic crisis in the future, and this economic crisis is destined to be paid for by other countries. Standing in front of Jiang Chen's desk, David Smith, CEO of Future Bank, explained the report to Jiang Chen. Is the US dollar depreciating? Jiang Chen held the report and fell into deep thought. It came faster than expected. If the dollar depreciates, the interests of the Future Group and even the economy of Singapore will be the first to be hit. The appreciation of crude oil will also have an immeasurable impact on the industries of the Singapore-Malaysia Special Zone and Angkor Island. The Future Group can produce minerals and food, but the only thing it has never been able to solve is oil. Singapore has vast seas and rich minerals, but there is no oil. And oil happens to be a very important thing in industrial production. From fuel, plastics, synthetic rubber, even clothes, pharmaceuticals, and even food, the field covered by oil can be said to be quite wide. It is precisely for this reason that oil is used as an important indicator for assessing global economic expectations. Any good ideas? Jiang Chen put the report aside and looked at David Smith and asked. Of course. Mr. Smith nodded. From his expression, he was obviously well prepared. I noticed that Singapore is still using the US dollar for settlement, and its resistance to fluctuations in the foreign exchange market is quite weak. If the US dollar depreciates significantly, the first to go bankrupt will be Singapore's finances. If the US dollar depreciates by 10 points, Singapore's GDP for the entire year last year will become a bubble. Hearing this, Jiang Chen almost broke out in a cold sweat. Damn, this is too dark. Originally, he planned to wait until the space elevator was built before doing so, but now it seems that he has to do it in advance. Coincident with Jiang Chen's idea, after a pause, Smith gave his suggestion. With the current population of Singapore, it is fully capable of supporting a monetary system. Considering the influence of the Future Group in Singapore, I propose that the Future Bank, in conjunction with several private banks in Singapore, establish an institution similar to the Federal Reserve to issue Singapore's own currency. Chapter 845 New Federal Reserve is established. On the morning of September 25th, the Singapore Statistics Bureau released various data on Singapore's GDP and economic output in the first half of 2018, proposing that Singapore's growing domestic market is sufficient to support the issuance of its own currency. In order to cope with the fluctuations in the international exchange rate market, it is necessary for Singapore to price its products in its own currency. As soon as this report came out, smart people immediately smelled the wind from it. This is the Singapore government building momentum for the issuance of its own currency. Sure enough, shortly after the release of this report, Future Group stood up and expressed support for the initiative. At the same time, Future Bank, together with a number of domestic banks and enterprises in Singapore, announced the establishment of the Singapore Joint Savings Bureau to issue a currency called Singapore dollar. It is planned to completely get rid of the situation of using foreign exchange as currency in China by the end of 2019. The currencies issued are mainly 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100 yuan in 6 denominations. The first issuance totaled 50 billion Singapore dollars, which was guaranteed by precious metals and foreign exchange with a total value of 54.1 billion US dollars. It was mainly put on the market in the form of loans, and at the same time, the channels for currency exchange were open to citizens of the country. In the future, 50 billion New Zealand dollars will be gradually released to the market to ensure that the total amount of currency is 100 billion. Considering that the currency has just been issued, and the foreign exchange reserves of Future Bank are still sufficient, the new Reserve Bank has temporarily adopted a fixed exchange rate system. That is, 1 New Zealand dollar is exchanged for 1 US dollar, and the foreign exchange reserves are used to make the New Zealand dollar fluctuate around the current exchange rate. After waiting for the currency to stabilize, the new Reserve Bank will gradually relax its monetary policy and transition to a floating exchange rate system in which the value of currency is determined by market supply and demand. As the largest shareholder of the new Reserve Bank, the first president of the new Reserve Bank is David Smith, president of Future Bank, and the vice president is elected by votes from other banks in New Zealand. Financial matters are easy to say, but they are quite troublesome to implement. In line with the principle of specialization, Jiang Chen handed over the specific matters of the new Reserve Bank to Mr. Smith to handle. He believed that this former Citibank executive would not disappoint him. The issuance of currency by a small country in the Pacific did not cause any big waves internationally. However, compared with the cold reaction of the international media, under the promotion of the media, a wave of support for the national currency has been set off from top to bottom in Singapore. Driven by the Future Group, many shopping malls have put labels of the new dollar on the shelves and give customers who use the new dollar to buy goods a 9-8% discount. Penglai City has even added the new dollar to the personal electronic accounts of urban residents and provided a one-click exchange button. In order to reduce travel costs, many tourists also choose to exchange their own currencies such as US dollars, RMB, and rubles for new dollars for consumption when entering the country. However, many foreigners have expressed considerable confusion about the new dollar. New dollar? Is it backed by coconuts? Maybe it's rubber, or shells or something. Smiley face. Why can't we just use the US dollar? A small country with a population of only 1 million has to issue its own currency. I don't see any benefit, except that it becomes more troublesome when paying. Maybe it's because the chairman of the Future Group wants to print his own portrait on the banknotes. In order to achieve this goal, it seems that he can't think of a better way. Miscellaneous ridicule can occasionally be seen in the comment area of related news. Although people don't care about the new Fed and the new dollar, they are still very interested in the Future Group itself. A self-made businessman can achieve this level. Not only does he control offshore countries to set up a monopoly group in the trust model, but now he has also issued his own currency. It's awesome enough. Countless capitalists and businessmen regard Jiang Chen as their goal, and countless aspiring young people regard him as a beacon to illuminate their own life path. Fortunately, Jiang Chen doesn't know this. If he knew, he might laugh out loud. Damn, can my success be copied casually? If you want to copy, get a warp bracelet first. No need to go to work on Saturday. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Natasha slept in and walked out of the room rubbing her sleepy eyes. She happened to run into Jiang Chen coming out of the bathroom. Good morning. Good morning. Natasha replied to Jiang Chen while yawning and walked around him to the bathroom. After washing up, she came to the dining room. There were sandwiches and milk on the table. Jiang Chen, who was already dressed, was enjoying breakfast. The Freemasons were tied up by Russia on the Ukrainian issue and had no action against Jiang Chen for the time being. This day was also a rare leisurely day. Although the two sides are still fighting in Madagascar, Africa is still far away from Asia. Picking up a piece of sandwich, Natasha rested her arm lazily on the table, one hand supporting the side of her face, and her blue eyes looked up and down at Jiang Chen suspiciously. It's really strange. Why did you get up so early today? And in formal clothes? Who wears formal clothes so early in the morning? And it's on the weekend? Hearing Natasha ask this, Jiang Chen's mouth curled up with a hint of pride. He straightened his collar, frowned in a cocky way, and said with a smile, "Ahem, the person standing in front of you now is Professor Jiang." Natasha rolled her eyes without any hesitation, took a big bite of the sandwich, and her eyes suddenly lit up, looking at the sandwich in her hand in disbelief. This taste, is it really a sandwich? How does it taste? Jiang Chen smiled, stuffed the last piece of sandwich into his mouth, and then took a tissue to wipe his hands. Great. Natasha praised without hesitation, quickly finished the sandwich in her hand, and licked the salad dressing on her fingers with reluctance. What is this made of? It's nothing, actually. Vegetables produced by the underwater planting base, plus Aisha's craftsmanship. While saying this, Jiang Chen subtly looked away. Apparently, she didn't notice how tempting this action was in the eyes of men, especially since she was still wearing pajamas. At this time, the door of the dining room opened, and it was Aisha who appeared at the door. She walked behind him, gently placed her hands on Jiang Chen's shoulders and massaged them. Aisha leaned close to his ear and whispered like a docile little wife, "The car is ready. Yeah. You should come and have something to eat. I ate in the kitchen after my morning run." If Jiang Chen didn't stay up too late the night before, Aisha would usually get up around 6:30, run along the beach for half an hour, take a shower, and then prepare breakfast for Jiang Chen. "What are your plans for today?" Natasha couldn't help asking as she watched Jiang Chen getting ready to go out. "Didn't I tell you? Please call me Professor Jiang today." Jiang Chen smiled, revealing his white teeth. "Speak human language." Seeing Natasha's unbelieving expression, Jiang Chen shrugged helplessly. "Well, the public elective courses of the University of Koro Island have started. As an honorary professor, I happen to have a public elective course today." After hearing Jiang Chen's words, Natasha looked at him dumbfounded, and even the sandwich in her mouth fell back onto the plate. "Professor? You? Puff, haha, cough. What are you laughing at?" Jiang Chen glared at Natasha, who was patting her chest hard and taking a gulp of milk, with her chest rising and falling. "Are you kidding? How can I be a successful person? What's wrong with being a professor? I'm the first president. There are so many students who want to take my course that I don't know where they are. By the way, what are you going to teach your students?" Jiang Chen answered honestly with a serious face. "Cosmology. Puff, cough. Water, cough. I'm dying." Natasha had just finished drinking the milk, and she was choking and holding back her laughter, and rushed into the kitchen like the wind. Looking at the swinging door of the kitchen, Jiang Chen straightened the tie around his neck, and complained fiercely in his heart, "It's choking to death." Chapter 846 Cosmology. On the campus of Koro University, under the shade of green trees, you can see young and beautiful figures. Most of them are from China, some are from the United States across the Pacific Ocean, and many are from Europe on the other side of the earth. The relaxed and diversified school philosophy allows students from all over the world to quickly integrate into this young university. At this moment, on the brick and stone road full of bookish atmosphere, students are holding books, walking in groups of 3 or 5, heading towards the teaching building. This scene is common on weekdays, but it is rare on weekends. "Hey, have you heard that Jiang Chen is coming to our school to give an open class?" Jiang Chen? Is it that Jiang Chen? The chairman of Future Group and the founder of the virtual reality network? Really? What is it about? I want to take the class. "Cosmology," said the girl wearing glasses and looking very quiet. "Cosmology? Is it science? What a surprise. I thought he would talk about economics, the internet, or something like that." Do we still need to attend the class? It has nothing to do with our major." "Nonsense. Do you even need to ask?" a girl said excitedly with stars in her eyes. "After all, it's the class given by the world's richest man. I heard that Harvard University wanted to invite him to explain artificial intelligence database and 3 definitions, but he didn't even go." Another girl echoed. "Indeed, there are not many opportunities to listen to the lectures of the world's richest man, especially Mr. Jiang Chen, who is quite low-key. Apart from showing up at the opening ceremony last year, he rarely appears on this campus. Even though the name of this elective class is quite strange, and seems to have nothing to do with the field that Jiang Chen is involved in, it still does not hinder people's curiosity about him. Regardless of the purpose, when Jiang Chen walked into the lecture hall, he saw that the classroom was already crowded. The classroom, which could accommodate about 200 people, was now packed to the brim. Some people even brought stools from the next classroom and sat in the aisle. Looking at those enthusiastic faces, Jiang Chen's scalp couldn't help but feel numb, even though he was used to big scenes. At this moment, he remembered the malicious laughter of Principal Raphael Lev when he was on the phone yesterday. Sure enough, what the old guy said was right. If he opened this open class, no matter how unpopular the course was, the classroom would definitely be full. Although his scalp was numb, it was impossible for him to be stage fright. After all, he was the leader of hundreds of thousands of people, and in the end times, he was even a warlord who ruled a region. A mere 100 students were not enough to make him stage fright. Smiling and waving to the audience, Jiang Chen turned on the headset hanging on his ear, coughed lightly to test the sound, and then spoke. Everyone here must be wondering, why did the person standing in front of you today choose such a strange topic as cosmology instead of imparting some more useful or practical success experience? The noisy voices in the classroom gradually subsided, and everyone looked intently at the podium and at Jiang Chen's face. This question is easy to answer. James Glassman, a famous economist and Wall Street investor, recently published a book that took me as his research subject and deeply. Of course, it seems one-sided to me. Analyzed why my future group and I only took 3 short years to go from nothing to the top of the pyramid. Jiang Chen smiled and looked at all the students present. I don't agree with his argument, but I agree with his conclusion. That is, my success story cannot be replicated. Since my experience cannot be replicated, it is not a panacea for you. It may just be a poison. But apart from my success in business, I don't think I can do anything better than you in other fields. So I chose a topic that I'm very interested in and have done some research on, which is cosmology, which I will talk about today. Jiang Chen noticed that many students picked up their phones and were recording videos with great interest. But he didn't care. What he was going to say today was just to start a discussion. As he said that, he turned around, picked up a marker, and wrote 4 words on the whiteboard. Where are they? Turning around, Jiang Chen put the marker on the table and cast his eyes on everyone present. Where are they? I think everyone here must be familiar with this question. Yes, it is the famous Fermi paradox. It is estimated that the number of stars in the observable universe is between 10 to the 22nd power and 10 to the 24th power, and the number of grains of sand on Earth is 7.5 asterisk 10 to the 18th power. After a pause, Jiang Chen smiled, then spread his hands and said, in other words, for every grain of sand on Earth, there are 10,000 planets in the universe. The universe is much larger than our imagination, and it is also darker than we imagine. This darkness does not come from aliens. In the face of the 13.8 billion years of time, all civilizations are humble and insignificant. Perhaps the spark of civilization once sprouted on Mars, right at our doorstep. It's just that it had already exhausted its lifespan when it appeared a billion or tens of billions of years ago, and the Earth a billion years ago was just a chaotic ocean, and even trilobites did not exist. This is the so-called cosmic sieve. The probability of us encountering an extraterrestrial civilization is extremely small, and the probability of us being able to discover each other after meeting is even smaller. But we still have to make an assumption. If we encounter an extraterrestrial civilization, and we happen to be able to discover each other and understand each other's existence, then I can assert that the consequences of blind contact will be quite dangerous. Understanding does not mean identification, and non-identification will lead to conflict. This kind of identification is reflected in many aspects such as aesthetics, values, and core values. Just like the dead who regard death as beauty, they can never accept the living who sing the praises of life. Jiang Chen did not expect his class to bring too much inspiration to these students. Many of the arguments he stated were already discussed by his predecessors. He just wanted to see how these students would react when he told the truth. Through the reactions of these students, at least a rough assessment can be made of the consequences of making the crisis facing Earth civilization public. The class is coming to an end. If there is a colony ship from an extraterrestrial civilization on its way to Earth. We don't know where it comes from, nor are we sure if it has good intentions. If you are the decision maker of Earth's civilization, what decision would you make after learning this information? This is your homework. I hope you will complete it carefully. Jiang Chen noticed that many students in the audience looked quite uninterested after hearing about this homework. Obviously, no one would really take this inexplicable homework seriously. After all, no matter from which angle you look at it, this homework is really boring. They are no longer at that naive age, Fantasizing about space, the first contact between humans and extraterrestrial civilizations, and those unrealistic problems. Perhaps a job, a scholarship, or a professor's topic would make them more willing to take it seriously. Thinking of this, Jiang Chen couldn't help but smile and shook his head. He sorted out the books on the table, coughed lightly, and said to the students who were about to leave the get out of class, "Okay, I know you are definitely not interested in this, so I will just say it directly. I believe that those of you who often play with mobile phones and wear helmets must be familiar with the space colonization plan of interstellar trade. The study of extraterrestrial civilizations is part of interstellar trade's space colonization plan. You may find it boring, but now I tell you that this topic has commercial value, and the homework I assigned is related to this topic. The prize for the project is $10,000 and 10 qualified papers will be selected for distribution. If you are interested, then submit a paper to me. By the way, students who have not chosen the course can also participate. The email address is on the whiteboard. I'm a person who is afraid of trouble, so I will paste my bank card account number in the email and send it together." Before he finished speaking, Jiang Chen noticed it. The eyes looking at him suddenly changed. Chapter 847, a reward of $10,000. That evening, the BBS of the University of Koro was flooded with the topic of the inexplicable elective course, cosmology. Many curious students filmed the class and uploaded it to the campus forum, personal space, and even internationally renowned video websites such as YouTube. For a time, it became a hot topic on major social platforms such as Future 1.0, Weibo, and Moments. Cosmology. Damn, this is a perfect score for pretending. The future group is going to the sky, shoulder to shoulder with the sun. Extraterrestrial civilization? This topic is too damn simple. It must be that. Dark forest. Give me $10,000. It seems that the space colonization plan announced by Starring Trade is not a scam. Even something as mysterious as the exploration of extraterrestrial civilizations has been specially established as a topic. If it is not a one-way ticket, I would like to give it a try. Compared with the hot discussions on the internet, many news and self-media have also published similar gimmicky headlines, reporting on this matter with different emphasis. Rich professor drives a Lamborghini to class, who makes universities a profit-seeking place for capital? Classroom assignment for essays, a reward of $10,000. The most expensive homework in history. Study of extraterrestrial civilizations becomes the subject of the Starring Trade project? Is it a foolish fantasy or a wild ambition to conquer the sea of stars? Shocking intelligence revealed in class. More details of the Starring Trade space colonization plan are exposed. As of noon, the number of space volunteer immigration applications has doubled compared to last month. If the space training base is not expanded, I'm afraid the training ground will not be enough. Otherwise, temporarily close it to the public? Kelvin suggested to Jiang Chen. No need. Jiang Chen shook his head. If you don't have enough money, go to the finance department to apply. Spaceflight was originally a money-losing project in the early stage, so don't worry too much about this. As long as every penny is spent where it should be spent, you don't have to be polite to me. Yes. Kelvin breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. To be honest, the project department he led was the only one in the entire group that had been losing money, and the losses were particularly severe, with hundreds of billions of dollars being burned. Although Jiang Chen had always told him not to worry about money and just build the space elevator, it was absolutely impossible to say that he had no psychological burden. After Kerwin left, Jiang Chen put the work documents aside, turned on his watch, clicked on his email, and browsed the homework submitted by his students. Perhaps because of the $10,000 bonus, all the students submitted their homework seriously, especially the Chinese students, who inherited the fine tradition of education in China, wrote papers of more than 100,000 words, cited dozens of literatures, and finally wrote down their own conclusions in detail, and finally attached a note saying thank you for your hard work, teacher. Jiang Chen was moved, but also extremely ashamed. He was negligent. He should have told these students that they only needed to submit a conjecture, and there was no need to write a lot of proofs, because for such a problem that had never happened, no absolute answer could be obtained, even if more previous literature was cited. He just wanted to take this opportunity to understand what most people think about contact with aliens. After ordering Jiang to search all the papers, he listed the central ideas of each paper and sorted them according to certain rules. There were a total of 1,173 papers, and Jiang Chen unexpectedly obtained 87 completely different opinions. Perhaps because of the long-term influence of political correctness, many students from the West, especially those from Western Europe, generally put forward more saintly views. Some people propose to set up special ecological protection areas on the Earth to accept these extraterrestrial visitors, or set up embassies to resolve possible differences between the two sides through dialogue. Some people also said that it might be inappropriate to set up an extraterrestrial civilization protection area on the Earth. After all, it is not certain whether the other party is suitable for the atmospheric environment. Maybe the oxygen we rely on for survival is poison to them. They should be placed on the moon or Mars. The answers of students from Asia tend to be more conservative. That is, before believing that the other party has good intentions, first doubt whether the other party is hostile. This may be related to being the invaded party in modern wars. When facing foreign civilizations, Asian civilizations are more vigilant and tend to show their weapons before showing the olive branch. Some people suggest that no matter what the other party's purpose is, we can shoot them from a distance. If they are still alive, then we will consider contacting them. Some people also suggest that communication and dialogue are necessary, but the premise is that the military force of Earth civilization must be shown to the other party. That is, send the fleet of Earth civilization to greet with military might. But there are also pessimists who suggest that, if they cannot resist, they should build their own colony ships to escape, at least let some people escape, and find a new home away from the solar system. There are also some interesting views that, since the other party can carry out interstellar navigation, it has proved that the other party's technological level is higher than ours. Instead of trying to contact or confront them, it is better to think about how to be cute and please the aliens. Being a pet is much better than being a livestock. Some female classmates did not take it seriously at all. They just posted their photos without any trace of Photoshop in the ML and asked indirectly, "Are you free this weekend? Can you take me for a ride?" and other flirting words. Looking at these opinions, Jiang Chen just smiled and shook his head helplessly. Excluding the boring things, the opinions can be divided into three categories: the peace faction, the war faction, and the surrender faction. After eliminating the papers that obviously did not intend to answer the questions properly, Jiang Chen found that among these students, the surrender faction actually accounted for 50%, and the peace faction accounted for 30%. Only 20% supported armed resistance. Moreover, among these 20%, the opinions were somewhat swaying. After all, let alone spaceships, even the dry dock for spaceships, the space elevator, has not been built yet. Although many people were optimistic when they wrote that when the Earth civilization came into contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, there would definitely be spaceships, giant ships and cannons. But they themselves did not know much about how to possess these magical weapons. It seems too early, Jiang Chen muttered to himself and cast his eyes on the world map hanging on the wall of the office. If this issue is thrown to the United Nations to decide, what conclusion will they finally come to? Will they welcome destruction with hope, or abandon unrealistic fantasies and fight with it, or fight with their own people first? Everything is unknown. He had a way to prove that the colony ship was on the way. He only needed an astronomical telescope. He even knew the coordinates anyway. But he had no way to prove its aggressiveness, nor did he have the confidence to convince everyone that the colony ship was hostile. He randomly selected 10 representative papers and gave qualified evaluations. Jiang Chen transferred $10,000 to the accounts of these 10 lucky people. For these students, this money may be a lot, but for him, it is nothing. Although it is a bit regrettable, it is not the best time to disclose the coordinates of the harmonious civilization and the intelligence of the colony ship. Chapter 848. Oil grown from the ground. On September 28th, the continuously rising oil price hit the highest increase of the month, closing at $71 per barrel, more than double the previous year. Jiang Chen also saw the pressure of high oil prices on the global economy from the financial report of Future Heavy Industry. Affected by rising costs, the profits of multiple projects of Future Heavy Industry fell by 13% year-on-year compared with the previous quarter. Future Biology and Future Mining were also slightly affected, while the profits of Future Tourism were the same as the previous quarter. The only one that maintained an upward trend was Future Technology. As long as the technology is kept ahead, the internet is like an inexhaustible gold mine. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, issued a statement on the same day that OPEC member countries will hold an informal meeting in Algeria in October to discuss moderate production increases to maintain oil market stability. Only when oil prices stabilize in a relatively reasonable range can the interests of these oil-producing countries be maximized. If the global economy is sluggish due to oil prices, although they can make a lot of money in a short period of time, their lives will become difficult as oil demand shrinks. However, after the announcement of the statement, the rising oil prices were not curbed. Tesla CEO Elon Musk once said, "How can you burn such a precious chemical raw material as oil?" The level of petrochemical industry is one of the standards for measuring the development level of a country's basic industry, and ethylene production is a symbol of the development level of a country's petrochemical industry. The fuel function is only the last function of oil. Otherwise, why not use gasoline to measure the development level of a country's basic industry? Basic chemical raw materials represented by ethylene, propylene, butadiene, benzene, toluene, and xylene all come from oil. The high oil price is indeed a big problem for emerging economies. However, for Jiang Chen, who owns the entire 22nd century technology, this problem is not as big as imagined. Not enough oil? Then just use something else instead. At this moment, in the laboratory of future human biology, Jiang Chen followed the CEO of the branch company Taoming into the culture area. "Please come this way." Taoming made a gesture of invitation and respectfully opened the door for Jiang Chen. The door opened, and fresh air rushed in. The circular roof was covered with 6 grid-shaped graphene plates, and below was a test field consisting of culture tanks separated from each other. In these culture tanks, there were plants that looked like palm trees. A dozen researchers surrounded the culture tanks. Some were responsible for recording data, some were debugging experimental equipment, and others were checking the growth of the plants. When the researcher who was leading the experimental team saw Jiang Chen and the director of the institute come in, his eyes lit up, and he immediately stepped forward. The white man in a white coat looked tall and thin, about 50 years old. "This is Mr. Jiang Chen, the chairman of our group," Taoming said with a smile to the researcher, who was walking over, and then led Jiang Chen next to him. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Jiang Chen. I have heard of you for a long time." Sullivan smiled and showed his white teeth, shook Jiang Chen's hand and said. Then, Taoming introduced Professor Sullivan to Jiang Chen. "This is Professor Bill Sullivan, who we hired from MIT. His research fields are bioengineering and genetic technology, and his main research direction is petroleum plants. He has an authoritative position in the research related to improved petroleum grass. It's also nice to meet you, Professor Sullivan. Thanks to your joining, our research topic has made a big step forward." Jiang Chen shook Professor Sullivan's hand and said with a smile, No, I should thank you." After letting go of his hand, Sullivan shook his head seriously, looked at Jiang Chen and said, "The DNA code you provided is very interesting. After seeing those materials, several problems that originally troubled me were immediately solved. May I know who invented those codes? If it's convenient, I hope to communicate with him." "Well, this is a bit difficult. For various reasons, he can't come here for the time being." Jiang Chen casually fooled the question, and then changed the subject. "Let's not talk about this. How is the research progress? Can you show it to me?" Hearing Jiang Chen asking about the research progress, Sullivan's expression seemed quite proud. "Of course, I'll show you right away." After saying that, He turned around and took Jiang Chen and Tao Ming to a palm tree, then spread his hands in the direction of the culture tank and smiled. "This is our research result, the oil palm." Sullivan gestured to his assistant, took the gloves from him, and put them on, then opened the glass cover of the culture chamber. After modifying the DNA of the oil palm, 37 DNA fragments were modified, and after 2 generations of cultivation, we got the current variant oil palm tree called oil palm. The reason why it is called oil palm is that the oil it produces is no longer the original palm oil, but a liquid with a similarity of nearly 90% to petroleum, like this. As he said that, he took the knife from his assistant and gently scratched the surface of the palm tree. An amazing scene appeared. Just scratching the bark, the dark red sap like blood flowed down the shallow wound. An assistant wearing plastic gloves stepped forward, scooped up 20 milliliters of liquid in a beaker, and then took it under an instrument to conduct on-site ingredient identification. Soon, a report was placed in front of Jiang Chen. Although he couldn't understand it, Jiang had interpreted the various parameters on the report for him. It was indeed as Professor Sullivan said, the sap produced by this oil palm is indeed surprisingly similar to oil. With a little processing, you can get oil that is even better than what is mined from the ground. At first we tried to produce this liquid through the fruit, but later we found that if the tissue that secretes oil is designed in the nutrient tissue of the plant, it will greatly reduce the production efficiency. Later we simply deleted the relevant DNA and completely transformed it into a fruitless palm tree, and then designed the organ that secretes oil next to the conducting tissue, and finally we got what we have now. As he said, Professor Sullivan excitedly knocked on the glass cover outside the culture tank. "You only need to make a small hole in the bark, and you can harvest a lot of oil from the ducts under the bark." Looking at this plant that looks no different from a palm tree, Jiang Chen's expression also became exciting. "My goodness, growing oil from the ground, this is simply a growing RMB." Although he brought the DNA of the oil plant from the database in the end of the world, a piece of DNA code that he couldn't understand was far less shocking than seeing this black gold coming out from under the bark. "Oh no, it's a dark red liquid. Who cares? As long as oil can be extracted, it's fine." "What's the production cycle of this plant?" Jiang Chen asked immediately. In his impression, the initial growth of palm plants is quite slow. After reaching maturity, it is only about 1 meter per year. If we have to wait 5 years to use this palm tree to mass produce oil, by then the daylily will be cold. There is no need to start planting from seedlings. We can induce differentiation of oil palms by special means, so that some structures in its nutritional tissues and conductive tissues undergo specific mutations, and then we can get finished plants. This induced differentiation cycle is only about 2 months. Sullivan said affirmatively. "Haha, you guys have done a great job this time." Jiang Chen immediately showed his joy, patted Sullivan on the shoulder, and said loudly, "All researchers participating in this project can receive a bonus of $500,000. As for Professor Sullivan, I will personally reward him another $5 million." Everyone in the institute gasped. Even Tao Ming, who was standing behind Jiang Chen, couldn't help but frown. The bonus alone was tens of millions, which is probably unprecedented in the world. However, Jiang Chen didn't think the money was not worth spending at all. He never skimped on spending on researchers. Talent is always the core of future group. Only by retaining these talents can we have a future. Chapter 849 Planted on the Sea. Petroleum plants are not the first biological invention of future humans. As early as the 1970s, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry Melvin Calvin discovered a tall evergreen tree called Trifoliate heavier in the tropical rainforest of Brazil. As long as a hole is drilled in the tree, a small amount of oil with a composition similar to diesel can be produced. In 1986, the United States took the lead in artificially planting petroleum plants. Subsequently, Britain, France, Japan, Brazil, the Philippines, Russia and other countries have also carried out research and application of petroleum plants, and established new green oil production bases such as petroleum botanical gardens and petroleum farms. Unfortunately, to this day, this green energy has not been widely used. It's not because it's not easy to use, but because of cost and output issues. Let's talk about output first. How much oil does Saudi Arabia produce? According to data released by OPEC, in 2018 this number has exceeded the historical peak of 12.5 million barrels every day. Yes, 12.5 million barrels a day. Think about what this concept is. Take the United States, which is relatively advanced in the field of oil plant research. For example, the annual oil harvested from each hectare of oil farm is only about 140 barrels. To put it in a broader perspective, even if its mass is equivalent to 120 barrels of crude oil, at present, the oil plants in the United States are only 100,000 hectares, and the annual oil production is only 12 million barrels. Very intuitive data has already explained the problem very intuitively. The oil production of oil plants in the United States is not as much as the daily oil production of OPEC member countries. Of course, it is not as much as the daily oil production of Texas, the United States. With such an output, it is obviously unrealistic to shake the status of oil. Therefore, all countries only regard this kind of oil plant as an alternative development item in the energy strategy, and subsidize these farms through various energy and environmental protection policies, so that they will not die. After all, no one can say what the future will be like. Maybe one day, the Middle East has dug up the last drop of oil, and these oil plants may have the hope of becoming a life-saving straw to solve the energy crisis. Of course, it is just hope. After all, this output is too small. However, the oil palm developed by the Future Human Biology Laboratory is different. Just make a small cut, and 10 liters of sap will flow out from the bottom of the bark. A barrel of oil is equivalent to 159 liters, and 16 trees can produce a barrel of oil, and this sap can be collected once a week. According to the calculation, that 100 oil palms can be planted on 1 acre of land. The average daily output of 1 acre of land is close to 1 barrel of oil. 100,000 acres is a daily output of 100,000 barrels of oil. It only takes 1 million acres of this oil palm to be planted, and then a few refineries dedicated to refining this sap are built. Not to mention that the energy needs of the new country can be met, even if it is exported to the neighboring oil importing country. I'm afraid it is enough. After coming out of the Future Human Biology Laboratory, Jiang Chen immediately ordered to purchase the oil palms on the market with all his strength, and on the other hand, let Tao Ming urge the laboratory to do its best to treat these purchased oil palms with special means such as inducing differentiation. The former is easy to handle. Oil palm is a plant that is very common in Luzon, Mindanao, New Guinea and even in New Zealand. Jiang Chen made a phone call, and Santos organized the farmers of Moro country to go into the mountains, use trucks and tractors to pull millions of oil palms to Davao Port and sell them to Future Group at a reasonable price. This amount is more than enough for Mindanao, which is rich in resources. Santos is complacent about making a fortune. Jiang Chen paid him at least $20 million, and he needs to pay the farmers no more than $1 million. As for where to plant these oil palms, Jiang Chen gave up the idea of planting them in the plantations in the Philippines after careful consideration. It is better to keep such good things in one's own country. Although the Philippines has become a de facto vassal of starring trade, the monkeys are outsiders after all. During the Cold War, the relationship between Japan and the United States was so strong, and Japanese companies sold several 5-axis CNC machine tools to the Russians, right? In order to ensure that these oil plants can be mass-produced at low cost, all oil palms must be planted domestically, and the plant cultivation technology and DNA code must be kept strictly confidential. The reason why Jiang Chen gave these researchers, especially Bill Sullivan, so many bonuses was also a disguised hush money. However, this 100,000 acres of area is not small at all. The area of the entire Koro Island is only more than 100,000 acres. All the houses must be demolished to squeeze out this area, not to mention cultivating millions of acres of oil palms to become an oil exporter. It is okay to cultivate crops in submarine farms, but it is a bit unscientific to plant palm trees several meters high. This is the first time that Jiang Chen has been so worried about the area of territory, but in the end, he still came up with a solution. Build a plantation with an area of about the same size as Penglay City next to Penglay City. These plantations do not need to be built according to the standards of the island. They only need to be built in units of 100 acres, with an offshore platform of about 250 meters in length and width, and fill it with soil. Then use graphene cables to connect these platforms to form a chessboard-shaped offshore plantation. Of course, it is just a thought. Whether it can be realized or not, you have to ask experts in this field. However, Jiang Chen estimated that the difficulty should not be too great. With the strength of graphene, it should not be too difficult to withstand this tidal force. The one-time investment cost of this floating farmland is definitely much cheaper than that of an underwater farm. As for how to deal with storms or other bad weather, it will be left to the technicians of future heavy industry to perfect. When building Penglai City, they have accumulated rich experience in offshore construction, so this small problem should not be too difficult for them. September passed quickly, and October came quietly. Compared with the turmoil of the previous period, September can be said to be stable and there was no major chaos. The Turkish civil war has been dominated by the government forces, and peace talks seem to be coming soon. In addition to the ongoing civil war in Madagascar, the Ukrainian issue continues to ferment due to Russia's attack. The global situation seems to have ushered in a relatively relaxed period as the northern hemisphere is about to enter winter. Of course, it is only relatively speaking. The international crude oil market is still filled with invisible gunpowder smoke, and an invisible hand is controlling this market, casting a haze over the global economy. The business of Future Group has also been affected, but compared with other international companies, it is much better. Under the trust model, Future Group is producing industrial raw materials while producing products. Although oil prices have driven up the prices of a series of resources such as ores and agricultural products, the impact on Future Group is only from oil prices. These days, Jiang Chen's life is very regular. He basically stays in the chairman's office of Future Group from Monday to Friday, and on Saturdays he will take half a day to go to Koro University to teach those lovely students. He doesn't expect them to learn anything. After all, people who come to take public elective courses don't expect to learn anything. Jiang Chen only hopes that this way can subtly change their concepts. As for the rest of the time, he will basically stay in the end of the world. After all, he is also a marshal, and maintaining an attendance rate is still very necessary to stabilize the morale of the army. Even if he is not there to preside over the overall situation, it is still necessary to show up. In addition, he also wants to accompany his family there. Since the crisis in Wanghai City was resolved, and the pace of expansion in the present world was taken, he rarely focused on the end of the world. Even as compensation, he hopes to spend more time with Sun Jiao, Yao and others. After all, for him, they are very important people in his life. Chapter 850C Plantation. It has been almost a year since I came to Penglai City. Zhao Qiang never thought that his miserable life as a worker would become a millionaire one day. In 2017, at the instigation of his family, he went to work in Xingguo from China through online recruitment. It happened that Penglai City was under construction at that time. With his good physique and hard-working spirit, he was transferred to the deck operation team as a worker. The name sounds very grand, but in fact, the daily work is to throw boxes into the water. When he is free, he helps the supply ship unload goods, or cleans with the cleaners. To be honest, until the day when Penglai City was completed, he couldn't believe that the giant city that floated from the bottom of the sea was a project he participated in. After Penglai City was built, everyone received a bonus of $20,000 because of his good performance during the work. After the deck operation team was disbanded, he was not only lucky enough to become a member of the formal establishment of Future Heavy Industry, but also got the opportunity to purchase internally when the first level apartment in Penglai City was sold, and bought a relatively remote property for $90,000. Now, the market price of this level 1 apartment is close to $500,000, and there is no demand for it. If converted into RMB in his hometown, his assets would be over 1 million. However, despite this, he still does a very basic job in Penglai City. He has a low level of education and can't really do other work. There is a provision in the internal purchase agreement that, although this internal purchase house is considered his asset, it cannot be rented out within 3 years and cannot be transferred within 10 years. Otherwise, he really wants to rent out this house. count the new dollars, and go back to his hometown to live RMB life. In the past year, he has worked as a plumber and a logistics sorter, and his job changes can be said to be different every few months. Fortunately, every job transfer will increase his salary, otherwise he is really not sure if he will go crazy. However, the transfer order given to him by the company this time made him completely puzzled. Transferred to future human biology, Penglai City oil crop plantation. He estimated that this transfer order might be because when he filled out his resume, he wrote a line on his resume that he worked as a forest ranger in his hometown. But it's hard to even see soil in Penglai City, so where can you find a plantation? Also, what the hell is that oil crop? He has lived for so many years, and this is the first time he has heard that oil can be grown from the ground. However, this question did not linger in his mind for long. When he was taken to the workplace and saw the scene with his own eyes, all the doubts in his heart turned into speechless shock. I saw that the rectangular floating fields, supported by unknown materials, were floating steadily on the sea. The soil was half a meter above the sea level and was protected by partitions to prevent high salinity waves from hitting it. Zhao Qiang roughly estimated that such a floating field was about 200 meters long and wide, with an area of about 100 acres. If all palm trees were planted, such a 100-acre land would only have about 10,000 pillars. Planting trees is not as troublesome as planting land. Trees rarely die if left alone. 2 people are in charge of such a floating field. This job should not be very tiring. After boarding the floating field, Zhao Qiang glanced at the ditch surrounding the wall. He saw that the ditch was filled with clear water. He didn't know whether the water was salty or fresh, but if it was used for irrigation, it shouldn't be salty. Limited by his education level, he didn't know what semi-permeable membrane technology was, but it didn't matter. The people above didn't need them to understand the principle. They just had to follow the requirements and plant all the palm trees towed by the boat into the ground. After a while, there were about 100 people standing on the floating field. At the invitation of the leader, Zhao Qiang followed behind others and stood in a crooked queue in the center of the floating field. In a while, the researchers of future human biology will come to tell you how to plant these trees and what work to do every day. Boss, we can plant trees. Someone hid in the crowd and said with a grin, "It's just oil palm. I've planted that stuff before. We don't need college students to teach us, just give us the saplings." Seeing that these people obviously didn't take his words seriously, the leader with the beer belly glanced at him and immediately raised his voice by several decibels. "I know you have planted trees before. Don't act so careless with me. I tell you, the fruits of the trees you plant in the future are not fruits, they are called gold. Did you hear me for a while? Gold." Everyone was stunned. Although many people disagreed with this, the impatient mood in their eyes was swept away and gradually became hot. Is this oil palm really so precious? I heard it. At this time, a young man wearing jeans and a white shirt, who looked very cultured, came over. After seeing the researcher, their boss with a beer belly immediately put on a flattering smile and politely invited him to the front. The researcher skillfully turned on the holographic image function on the future phone, cleared his throat, and went straight to the point, explaining the details of the work to the newly appointed plantation employees. From how much water to pour every day to how much oil to extract every week, how to open the bark, and how to extract the oil. Every step is very particular. Zhao Qiang and the others were stunned. Those people who shouted that they knew how to plant trees were also confused at this moment. After finishing speaking, the researcher turned off the holographic screen and looked around at all the grassroots employees present. If you don't understand anything, ask quickly. The crowd hesitated for a long time and no one said a word. They didn't understand anything and they didn't even know where to start. The researcher had obviously anticipated this situation and he didn't expect these people to digest all the planting techniques of oil palm in such a short time. All he needed was for these people to have a general understanding of the planting process. There was a computer connected to the company's intranet in the workers' hut in Fusion, where they could check the relevant details of planting. As long as you are willing to learn, there is nothing you can't understand. I hope you can take this job seriously. The researcher pushed his glasses on the bridge of his nose and looked at everyone and said, From now on, you will be divided into 100 production teams, 2 people in each team, and manage a 100-acre floating field. The company will give bonuses ranging from 100,000 to 10,000 New Zealand dollars to the top 10 production teams, together with the year-end bonus. The things I just talked about are all in your dormitory, which is the small house. The researcher pointed to the iron house next to the floating island. If you don't understand, you can ask through the intelligent program. Time is money. If you start production one day earlier, you will be one day ahead of your competitor standing next to you. But let me say this in advance. If the saplings don't survive, your bonus will be deducted. The researcher emphasized at the end, then looked at the leader with a beer belly, and gave him the time. Do you understand everything? The leader shouted at the top of his voice. I understand. Under the stimulation of the bonus, everyone's eyes flashed with a strong fighting spirit, and they couldn't wait to rush into the dormitory and hold the computer to read those planting techniques. As the researcher said, time is money. If they start production one day earlier, they can be one day ahead of their competitors. 100,000 Singapore dollars, converted into RMB, is more than 600,000 yuan. Even if it is divided between 2 people, each person can get 300,000. This is the first time they have seen a job with such a high bonus. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.